It all starts in a brutal setting, where surviving the harsh reality means the strong have to feed on the weak. Our protagonist has had a rough ride, just trying to exist in a world where not having any power means you've already lost everything. Even your own life is snatched away without a hint of mercy. In this wasteland, a colossal sandworm erupts from the ground and makes a quick meal out of any vehicles trying to cross the desert. Because he's so weak and pathetic, this young guy finds himself staring death in the face. About 100 years ago, a devastating flash hit the entire world. A weird, unknown radiation started eating up every living thing on Earth. Just like that, the planet, once known as the Blue World, went through a total makeover. It quickly turned into a massive desert, a graveyard of sand. For the few humans left, there was no choice but to build fortresses just to keep breathing. The protagonist wanders, thinking if the goal was total annihilation, it's pretty pointless to keep these worms alive. Suddenly, a rough punch slams into the seat back right next to him. The aggressor mocks him, claiming his hand slipped by accident. With a smug grin, the big guy apologizes and demands the young man's name, just to make a show of making amends. Visibly annoyed, he identifies himself as Xian. The group starts clowning around, laughing at his simple name and asking if he had a bunch of different dads. Noticing Xian's angry look, the bully keeps pushing, clearly fueled by the kid's frustration. Getting comfortable right beside him, the guy tells him to change that attitude, reminding him that everyone on this bus to the mines isn't a real miner anyway. Intrigued, he asks why Xian got locked up, guessing he's just a runner or a criminal caught for theft, assault, or fraud. But before he can finish his sentence, he throws a straight punch right into Xian's face. The force of the hit sends the kid flying into the vehicle's glass. The bully corrects himself and asks if the kid really wants to know why he's there. He coolly declares that he's here because he committed homicide. From his perspective, he didn't take a life, because in New Seal, that label is reserved for the powerful. He calls his victim nothing but scrap metal, some guy who tried to rob him and met a lonely end. The problem started because the guy he took out was related to someone important, and the man threatened the attacker before he died. Hearing that name leaves Xian in complete and total shock. At the end of the day, while the strong are seen as human, an awakened is looked at like a god above everyone else. And that insignificant nobody made the mistake of offending one of those divine entities. Terrified of that powerful being's revenge, the bully panicked and took refuge on the mine transport, just to save his own hide. Cutting the story short, Xian asks, with a straight face, if the guy is done venting yet. The attacker suddenly notices an unexpected cut on his hand and panics, not having a clue what happened. Taking advantage of the distraction, the protagonist lands a powerful kick right in the bully's face. Unable to react, the guy collapses backward, groaning in pain. In a split second, the giant grabs Xian by the neck, furious, warning him that he's crossed the line. He curses, annoyed that he worked so hard to escape an awakened, only to run into another headache right here. Getting ready to punish the kid, the man lets out a glowing aura, showing everyone else that he's an awakened, too. The other passengers on the bus go into total panic mode as they realize what's happening. The resulting chaos makes the vehicle lose its stability, shaking violently on the sand path. Annoyed by the movement, the aggressor screams at the driver to take control. But when they look at the cockpit, they realize there's nobody driving at all. The man tries to protest again, but freezes as soon as he looks out the window. The bus wasn't heading to the mines like they thought, and now it's plummeting into the void. Terrified, he can barely finish his sentence at the horrifying sight. Zen also realizes the tragic fate waiting for them just below. The cruel reality is that they were shipped off as direct food for the sand monster's open jaws. All the passengers fall screaming in unbearable despair. Thinking as he falls, Xian feels that his existence has always been a tragic echo of this same helplessness. Whether it's suffering on the streets, facing awakened, or becoming Monster Chow, none of it was new to him. Because the only law of this world he understood was that the strong always snatch everything away from the weak. Accepting his bitter end, the young man drifts into total apathy. He concludes that his death happens solely because he's a useless person with no powers. In the shadows, he laments that dreaming about being someone stronger is just a pointless daydream. Unexpectedly, Xian's hand breaks through the layer of sand. A sand vortex starts spinning rapidly in the serene desert. The protagonist's eyes snap open, radiating a powerful energy. He bursts violently from the ground, gasping for air. Completely out of breath, he clutches his chest, trying to overcome the terror of impending death. An unknown force is now rushing through every bone in his frame. Looking around, he notices the shattered carcass of the massive sand creature. He's in shock, not understanding how he survived something that seemed impossible. The echo of his heartbeat thumps through the ruins of the desert, where the colossal tower remains buried. This rhythmic pulse seems to be the only sign of life in that vast, devastated metropolis. Every beat is reflected with intensity in the young man's vivid, newly awakened gaze. He contemplates the huge, floating structures that make up that dark, chaotic environment. Gritting his teeth, adrenaline keeps racing through his system. The destroyed planet quietly waits for a new outcome. Suddenly, his latent gift takes total control of his visual perception. By instinct, Xian materializes a massive explosion of sand with his hands. The destructive power cuts through the air like a storm, sweeping across the area without any limits. Standing firmly in the center of the crater, he swears to himself that he will keep living. Even imprisoned in this cursed world where everything has turned to debris, he refuses to give up. Moving with firm steps, he vows to survive at any cost. The mysterious markings on his face glow, matching the firmness of his commitment. Leaving the titanic carcass behind, he locks it in his mind that he will fight, no matter what happens. Feeling every fiber of his being pulse with power, the protagonist finally understands the ability he just gained. Clenching his fist with vigor, the young man finally realizes he's gone through an awakening. However, the peace is brief, as a gigantic sandworm resurfaces, letting out a powerful roar in front of him. The creature charges mercilessly, destroying the ground with brutality. In that instant, someone leaps from the heights toward the monster, challenging it to combat. Declaring that the beast is blocking his path, he prepares a punch to use it as a test. The warrior's gaze radiates a lethal intensity just before the impact. With a thundering force, he strikes, creating a shockwave that travels across the entire desert. Surprised by the blast, the protagonist is thrown to a distance, screaming in pain. Spitting out sand, he leans on the ground, trying to understand where that individual suddenly came from. Completely perplexed, Xian can barely get the words out as he processes what he just witnessed. Nearby, a girl complains that the creature is too bland, suspecting it ate something gross. The warrior, still on top of the monster's remains, thinks about heading back to the ground. With his huge sword in position, he casually considers the option of heading to the lower level. The rest of the defeated creature falls violently against the earth, kicking up a cloud of dust. Holding his own wounded arm, the young man thinks the whole situation is total insanity. Impressed by how easily it was taken down, Xian finally understands the level of a true awakened. Then, the girl approaches the warrior, praising the strength of Captain Zhang Yong Bum. Hugging his arm, she celebrates the speed of the feat, while the young man tries to figure out where she appeared from. Even thinking the captain's strength is surreal, Xian gets a scare when the girl grabs his left arm. Smiling at her companions, she states with conviction that that beast doesn't offer much resistance. Silently, the group's leader watches the newcomer with suspicion. The girl insists on pulling the young man's arm, anxious to introduce her discovery to the group. Showing off, she focuses all her attention on the young survivor. With monstrous strength, the girl simply drags Xian through the desert sand. Unable to react, he only lets out a groan while being hauled along every which way. Excited, she invites everyone to try to figure out the rank and aptitude of the new guy, creating suspense. Raising the guy's arm in celebration, the girl stops abruptly when she notices something isn't right. Getting impatient, Xian pulls away, rejecting the unpleasant game. Pointing excitedly, she exclaims that the young guy doesn't have any rank insignia. Fallen and exhausted, he hears the girl wonder how an awakened cannot be sporting the official mark. From inside the armored vehicle, one of the members orders them to hurry, because dusk is coming. Holding the guy back, the girl asks the captain what to do, warning that he'll perish if he's left there. The leader stays with a stern look, evaluating the case with caution. Feeling the severe look, the protagonist swallows hard, waiting for the verdict. Without ceremony, the man orders them to throw the guy in the car, indicating that his destination should be the mines. Instantly, the military jeep takes off, kicking up dust through the orange desert. Inside, the driver argues harshly with the captain, because he always moves forward alone, ignoring suggestions. While the argument happens, Xian gets comfortable in the corner, thinking the ride is unexpectedly comfortable. Lying down with the vehicle's movement, he wonders about the absence of the mark on his arm. The memory of the blinding glow on his wrist during the awakening returns clearly to his mind. Analyzing his own bandaged hand, he is absolutely sure that he awakened an ability that controls sand. Intrigued, the young man wonders why nobody can see his insignia. Inspecting it carefully, he notices that the marks on his wrist have the exact shade of the surrounding sand. This makes him remember that the color of the marks glow, always corresponds to the individual's power affinity. The blue-haired girl had mentioned earlier that magic users sport a blue tone, while combatants focused on hand-to-hand fighting always show an intense reddish glow. Staring at his own hand, he thinks that, although there are reports of rare affinities, his is unique. After all, a gift capable of manipulating sand freely is something he's never heard of. Although his insignia was classified as rank F, the lowest, he feels his potential is limitless. A smile of confidence draws itself on the young man's face. Decided, he swears to keep his strength a secret and endure everything in silence until he masters this ability. Because, deep down, he understands that that vast, desolate desert will become his great stage. The jeep finally reaches the destination, revealing the immense facilities carved into the cliffs. Walking through the place, Xian observes the guard towers and thinks the mine's infrastructure is surprisingly common. The guard orders him to shut up and follow him quickly, but the young man retorts, asking to be freed from his bindings first. Further back, the captain receives confirmation that the guy really was the only survivor. Carefree, the girl stretches her body, suggesting the leader shouldn't worry about a mere coincidence. With a heavy expression, the man disagrees immediately, ensuring it wasn't a fluke. His gaze remains fixed and reflective while he revisits the details of the scene. The sight of the perfectly circular hole dug into the desert sand doesn't leave his head. Walking through the gloomy tunnel, the guy regrets not asking for that captain's identity, sensing they'll meet again. Emerging from the passage, he runs into a true, busy underground city. Countless people work, talk, and cook meals in the narrow, noisy corridors of the mine. Impressed, he comments that there are people living there, but the guard orders him to shut up and wait. Questioning if he'll be abandoned there, the young man receives a threat of being shot in the head. Arrogantly, the official declares that a loser like him wouldn't be of any use anyway and leaves. Labeling the guy an idiot mentally, the protagonist chooses to use the free time to find something to eat. Soon he finds a skewer kiosk and asks the elderly man grilling the meat for a moment. However, his eyes widen in shock as he notices an unusual detail on the wall in the back. An old promotional poster displays an inspiring phrase asking for their effort to light up New Seoul. While handing him the skewer, the vendor asks ironically if the young man found the message motivating. Showing off his calloused hands, the old man reveals that the real source of energy for the capital isn't mana stones. Biting the food, Xian, confused, asks what the alternative would be. Pointing the knife directly at the young man, the elder answers dryly that the energy is them themselves. With a dark laugh, he explains that scraps like them are the real human fuel to support the metropolis. The merchant notes that the young man talks too much for his age, and asks if he's already preparing for the afterlife. Changing the subject, the elder asks how the experience inside the sandworm was, showing that the rumors had already reached him. Without beating around the bush, he calls the young man a pathetic brat and warns that that place isn't a shelter for quick profits. The vendor laughs with disdain, calling everything nonsense and gesturing to the side, wanting to show something curious. In this dark corner, a pile of boxes and obsolete objects rests, accumulating dirt. Thinking the elder is delirious, Xian asks what's interesting about that pile of junk. The man answers coldly that those artifacts are what's left of whoever passed through the mines, symbolizing the young man's own fate. Everyone who arrives there tries at first to resist working in the mana stone excavations. However, the constant fear of perishing in those tunnels forces them to trade anything, just to survive a little longer. Little by little, they part with everything, even their soul, but in the end, everyone shares the same outcome when the mine consumes them. Even with the saying that a man is remembered for what he leaves behind, he guarantees that a loser like the young man won't leave more than scrap. With an intimidating look, the old man confesses that he longs to find out what will be left of the protagonist. Finishing the meal, Xian ignores the threat and asks the price, being surprised to hear the cost of 10 sun coins. Completely perplexed, he asks if the guy lost his mind or if the meat was seasoned with gold, considering that a discarded skewer was worth 9 coins. With a tense smile, the young man tries to work around the situation, informing him that he doesn't have that amount. Indignant, he accuses the man of extorting a rookie and asks if the guy has gone completely crazy. Silently, the old man pulls out a massive butcher's cleaver in the darkness. Facing the intimidation, Xian declares firmly that he won't pay a single cent for the food. Suddenly, his expression changes completely as he's surprised by a swift movement. A dry thud echoes through the gloomy alley during the unexpected attack. The guy is lifted by the collar, while the elder asks if he didn't find it peculiar that an old man would run a business in such a dangerous place. Unable to touch his feet to the ground, the protagonist struggles, trying to escape the crushing grip. Keeping a calm posture, the aggressor joins his hands and asks ironically what the guy intends to do now. The elder's robust and defined muscles expose the real strength he was hiding under his dirty clothes. Almost out of breath, Xian begs for calm, reiterating that demanding 10 coins is an exaggeration and begging for an honest conversation. Taking advantage of the guy's desperation, the vendor smiles and claims to be a reasonable man, accepting a fair trade. He demands directly the mana stone that the young man keeps hidden in his pants pocket. This demand leaves the protagonist stunned, realizing that the rumors about the valuable stone were already circulating through the underground city. Holding out his hand with authority, the elder orders him to hand over the item, promising a proper value for it. Holding the cleaver firmly, he grumbles that the young man has no idea of the atrocities he had to commit to defend that establishment. Sweet and cold, the guy still tries to buy time, asking the elder to ignore the debt or record it for future payment. However, the man ends the conversation by landing a heavy blow on the young man's face. At that moment, one of the mine's subordinates screams, furious, complaining about the slowness and ordering the boss to eliminate that trash already. The elder doesn't even hesitate and materializes a powerful blast of magical sand toward the intruder. Hit square on, the brute is thrown back with brutality. The energy explosion sweeps the area, raising a dense cloud of debris through the alley. Through the dust that settles, the protagonist remains standing, trying to process the strength level of that individual. Grabbing the guy's head again, the vendor shouts, demanding his full attention. He asks if the young man is daydreaming or hallucinating, while Xian only lets out a quiet insult. Seeing that there's no other way out, the guy reaches into his pocket to get what he was asked for. Reluctantly, he pulls out a huge glowing blue stone, giving up the magic that the elder longed for so much. Inspecting the crystal up close, the man murmurs, calculating the value based on the gem's impressive size. He sets the cost at 100 sun coins, but Xian replies instantly, shouting that it's worth, at the very least, 300. Indignant at the devaluation, the young man points out the scarcity of resources and argues that he should have sold that as worm waste. Irritated by the uneven negotiation, he turns abruptly, wanting to leave that place as soon as possible. Gritting his teeth in frustration, Xian thinks that, if he wanted, he could take down that old man, but concludes that it isn't the right moment. Casting a challenging look over his shoulder, he demands to receive, at the very least, the proper change for the precious stone. Agreeing cynically, the vendor orders him to protect the money well, because the place is infested with pickpockets, just like the young man himself. Trying to look generous in the initial deal, the elder authorizes the young man to choose any object from that pile of junk as part of the change. The protagonist just analyzes the pile of abandoned items, confirming that he'll choose something. Scurrying through the mess, he sighs, frustrated for having believed that he would find something valuable amidst so much uselessness. The old man watches the scene intrigued, noticing the guy's difficulty in selecting something due to the disposable nature of the objects. He finds it fun to witness that youthful obsession with never accepting a loss in a negotiation. Digging deeper, Xian asks about the absence of something superior, until his eyes find a peculiar object. Holding an old hourglass, he hears the elder explain that the item was forgotten by a merchant caravan. With no expectations of finding anything better, the guy decides to take that glass and metal artifact, regardless of anything. The merchant notes that he has a bizarre taste for useless objects, and the young man agrees, without giving it much importance. Already moving away through the dirty corridor, the protagonist asks, casually, about the elder's name. With a harsh and exhausted voice, the man shouts that his name is Klexi. With an ironic farewell smile, Xian suggests they make sure never to meet again. Klexi lets out a lonely laugh in the dark alley, grumbling that the future is unpredictable. The circular base of the old hourglass remains static on the stone floor of the temporary room. The dark sand continues to run slowly through the narrow glass. There are approximately 10 minutes left until closing. Confined to the workers' lodging, the guy settles onto the rigid mattress, trying to regulate his own breathing. Throwing his head back exhausted, he sucks the air deeply into his lungs. Exhaling his breath calmly, Xian tries to calm his nerves after a terrible day in the desert. With focused and glowing eyes, he stares at the hourglass, mentally ordering the sand to move. Focusing all his newly awakened power on the object, he anxiously waits for any magical manifestation. Nothing happens, which makes the guy click his tongue in frustration, realizing that there's no connection to his aptitude. Resting his head on his hand, he wonders despondently almost convinced that it was the first time he'd seen that item in his life. Still, a strange feeling took hold of him in the shop, as if the hourglass had been kept there precisely for him. The memory of a gagged girl crosses his thoughts, bringing a feeling of familiarity that seemed to call to him in the darkness. Suddenly, the room's door is broken down with extreme violence, revealing a completely furious man in the hallway. The brute, named Park Man-ho, curses at Xian, asking why he hadn't dragged himself straight to the extraction mine. Without showing any fear, the protagonist faces the intruder, stating his name and complaining that no one had instructed him on the destination. Without hesitating, the big guy charges with everything, throwing a massive punch, but Xian manages to dodge, throwing his body backward just in time. Upon noticing that he missed the hit, the man stares at his own clenched hand, grumbling indignantly. Completely irate, Park Man-ho advances again, grabbing the guy by the collar and ordering him to shut up. Subsequently, the brute starts throwing several attacks against the protagonist, screaming, irritated, if he supposes he can answer back so easily. He states with hatred that a useless scrap who hadn't even awakened should take the beating quietly, instead of uttering nonsense. At that moment, a more experienced miner interrupts the conflict, sighing with fatigue, and orders the guy to hurry and accompany him. Feeling pain throughout his body, the young man holds his own wounded arm while starting to walk in silence. With a heavy look, Xian memorizes the aggressor's name, swearing to himself that, certainly, he will kill him in the future. Soon they reach the immense and shrill entrance of Sector 3 of the excavation area. The local workers greet the big guy, who quickly orders the delivery of mining equipment to the newcomer. The person in charge warns that the costs will be deducted from his salary, but the protagonist ignores the lecture and asks directly what the payment amount is. Adjusting his helmet, the guy is surprised to hear the man say he would still get to that part of the explanation. Unexpectedly, a heavy pickaxe is thrown through the air, landing in his hands. Losing patience, Park Man-ho shouts that the helmet will also be taxed and insults the guy, demanding he start work promptly. Without any mercy, the brute orders them to send that trash straight to the dangerous Tunnel 972. The supervisor tries to contest the order, but backs off terrified when the big guy threatens to send him to that place if he continues to complain. While they walk, Man-ho warns that he will eliminate him if he returns without results, making Xian mock him with a cynical answer just to provoke him. Descending through the colossal structures of the cave, the guide laments the rookie's misfortune, who arrived exactly on the day the boss lost everything in bets. Curious, the protagonist asks about the bets and discovers that the mine has all sorts of dark vices, operating exactly like the capital. Entering the rusty elevator, Xian mocks that the business must profit a lot with idiots like that brute around. Sighing despondently while observing his own hand, the young man complains about having to mine, until the man states, strangely, that he shouldn't get hurt. With a grave tone, the guide reveals that absolutely no one has ever suffered a simple scratch in there, immobilizing the metal cage right afterward. Before them stretches the completely dark and terrifying entrance of the feared Tunnel 972. The guy walks out, convinced, swearing to return quickly, but the miner interrupts him coldly, guaranteeing that he won't return. From behind the bars, the old man clarifies that several individuals have already disappeared mysteriously in that dark tunnel, without leaving any trace. Feeling the weight of guilt, the man apologizes for the situation and thanks the boy in a tone of farewell. He recognizes that the young man is being forced to enter a rift where no one else would have the courage to step. Realizing the trap, Xian panics and starts to cry out in despair while watching the elevator go up, abandoning him alone there. Completely helpless in the darkness, he mutters, disbelieving, trying to process that he was really left behind in that end of the world. Taken by fury, the protagonist swings the pickaxe, cursing everyone for having thrown him there solely because of an idiot boss's bad mood. Taking the frustration out on the rocks, he wishes that everyone would rot, but ends up letting the tool slide from his hands without intention. The object is thrown straight into a mysterious rift in the wall, leading the guy to cry out for his pickaxe to return. Advancing with caution through the cave taken by a thick fog, he asks what kind of strange place that is. With clearer reasoning, the young man realizes that the tunnel is full of magical energy, something that common humans would be unable to feel. The pressure rises with every step, making him deduce that any common individual would have already died from overload if they had gotten that deep. Reaching the end of the dark passage, he peeks carefully from behind the rocks to observe what awaits him. Instantly, his eyes glow with relief as he glimpses his tool thrown on the ground just ahead. Stepping onto the earth, He lets out a dry laugh upon noticing that the handle broke, but tries to be content for having recovered the item. However, the relief is brief as soon as he realizes he's exactly in the center of an immense, glowing red vortex, pulsing with energy. Completely shocked, the protagonist's pupils dilate as he faces the seriousness of that absurd situation. The floor under his feet simply disappears and he falls into the void, screaming in despair upon understanding that that is a portal. Gravity pulls the young man's body violently downward through the magical darkness in freefall. The broken pickaxe also falls, spinning in the air right behind him, being swallowed by the immense rift. While falling, old memories of being assaulted on the street surface, evoking the voices of cruel individuals saying he wouldn't last much longer. In that merciless time, he longed only to consume a piece of old bread, but ended up being brutally beaten for trying to steal food from the strong. Running terrified through the dark corridors, the only thing the little boy always wanted was to have the right to dream of a future. The aggressors pursued without mercy, screaming that his miserable life would end right there and promising a terrible punishment. Absolute dread made the young man's heart race, wanting only a reality in which he didn't have to fight for his life daily. Remembering all that torment, he concludes, with bitterness, that his only and real desire was simply to live a common life. Suddenly, a dry impact ends the fall when the protagonist's face hits the arid ground on the other side of the portal. Trembling and confused, he gets up slowly, grumbling about pain in his head and asking why that place was so suffocating. Curious, he touches the dark ground and soon understands that he is kneeling on a thick layer of ash. Immediately, a frightening realization makes the young man's expression harden with dread about his location. The guy curses softly, connecting the dots, understanding perfectly what it means to be devoured by a vortex of magical energy. Upon raising his head, the hellish vision of an active volcano surrounded by flames confirms that he was thrown straight into the interior of a dungeon. At that instant, a violent eruption launches molten magma into the air, right next to where he had just fallen. Feeling his skin burn, he observes his own hand emitting smoke due to the extreme heat of the hostile environment. Completely in a panic, the protagonist runs off clumsily, shouting insults and lamenting the high temperature. Stopping to inhale the dense air, he laments the reality of it, aware that facing a place like that requires vast preparation in the capital. The young man stares at his hands stained with soot, noting that breathing that volcanic ash for a prolonged period will destroy his lungs. With no time to waste, he crouches quickly and ties his boots as tightly as he can to be able to run. Subsequently, the guy ties a piece of fabric to his face to filter the poisonous air and deduces that hell must have an exit. With his gaze fixed on the mountain of glowing lava, Xian is certain that the return portal must be at the highest point of the place. Decided, he concludes that remaining there would be certain death due to the heat and chooses to take advantage of the absence of beasts to escape. Taking the first heavy step on the burning ground, the young man swears to follow the shortest and fastest path possible. Adrenaline floods his veins while the guy runs with all his energy, shouting his name and reaffirming that he will never give up. Suddenly, his confidence crumbles as soon as his foot steps falsely on an unstable rock on the edge of the ravine. His entire body falls forward, out of control, making him curse upon hitting the dusty ground with his face. Sliding down the slope at high speed, the protagonist begs, desperate, to manage to stop the movement before plummeting into the boiling lava. With a violent jolt, the fall is finally interrupted upon hitting a pile of irregular rocks with force. Trembling and covered in sweat, he raises his face, shouting that a little lava isn't enough to scare him. Completely exhausted by the impact, the young man leans on his hands, trying to force his wounded body to get up from the ground. Anger dominates the guy, who clenches his fist with such force that his knuckles turn white with tension. Completely enraged, Xian turns upward and yells, insulting the mine's brute and swearing to eliminate that wretch as soon as he gets out of there. Spent, he resumes walking, grumbling that the irritation only makes the situation worse, choosing to channel all that energy into his own survival. Xian grabs his clothes, swearing to himself that he will survive that hell somehow and will fight to return. Running without interruption down the burning slope, he estimates mentally that he needs only 4 more jumps to reach his goal. Jumping over a river of incandescent lava, the protagonist focuses exclusively on escaping from there. Totally concentrated, the guy orders himself not to stop or wander, just keep moving quickly. He refuses absolutely to admit that his life ends in such a hideous place as that. At that moment, the young man makes a safe jump through the air, looking for firmer ground on the rocks. However, Despair dominates him upon realizing that he is falling straight into the open jaws of a colossal monster made of magma. The immense beast closes its jaw with absurd violence, consuming the space where the guy was. Right after, the huge being submerges back into the lava as if nothing had happened. The magma bubbles slowly, leaving the environment in a deadly and frightening silence. That vast pool of fire seems to have devoured the young man completely, without leaving any trace. However, a thud of rocks fragmenting on the side of the mountain attracts his attention. Gasping and covered in soot, Xian complains about the unbearable heat of the place, shocked to note that even the ashes are melting. Staring at his own hand, he celebrates for having confirmed his capacity to manipulate volcanic ashes, which ended up saving his life. Totally spent by the intense use of his power, the guy falls to the ground, emitting a groan of pain. Crawling with effort, the protagonist understands that the environment of that dungeon is much more lethal than the creatures themselves. The intense heat starts to burn his respiratory tracts internally, making the guy lose his breath and feel his consciousness disappear little by little. Stretched out on the hot earth floor, he asks, weakened, if that's where his journey will end. Rejecting that tragic end, the young man clenches his wounded fist with the little energy he has left. He tries to get up, laughing nervously, considering it unfair to perish without ever having dated, after swearing survival minutes before. Joining all his energy, the guy shoots through the irregular terrain, employing his sand power to obtain momentum. Xian mocks, ordering Death to take a crocodile bag in his place. However, the immense magma monster resurfaces, tearing through the volcanic ground right behind the guy. Surprised by the colossal creature, the protagonist panics and emits a scream of terror while fleeing. Suddenly, he freezes his steps upon hearing a mysterious voice praising his ability, questioning, scared, if it's death itself speaking. Looking up, the young man is stunned when the stranger states that manipulating sand is a fascinating feat. To the guy's amazement, the mysterious figure falls, cutting the air straight toward the scalding monster. Recognizing the face in the middle of the smoke, Xian is perplexed to note that it's just a smiling old man falling there. Without understanding absolutely anything, the boy asks how a man of that age is plummeting from the sky in that way. With a look of madness, the elder holds his massive sword's handle tight, ready for the impact. Spinning his body in the air with brutal force, the old man strikes the heavy blade hit with everything. Noticing the imminent danger, Xian feels the destruction approaching and shrinks down to try to protect his skull. The warrior's titanic blow hits the ground, generating a devastating shockwave that sweeps the entire area. Rock fragments and magma are launched in all directions due to the colossal energy explosion. The impact pressure is so severe that it drags the guy backward with extreme violence. Unable to stay upright, the protagonist is thrown to a distance while screaming amidst the destruction. Fallen to the ground, dazed, he holds his ringing ears, wondering if his eardrums were ruptured and who that monster could be. Regaining his senses gradually, the guy looks for the elder and soon panics upon remembering the fire beast. However, surprise takes him upon glimpsing the lava carcass split in half, with the warrior standing calmly beside it. Trembling with dread, Xian notes that that man isn't just any awakened. The imposing presence of the elder, wrapped in flames, makes it explicit that he is at a level of unreachable strength. With heavy steps, the mysterious warrior starts to walk slowly toward the guy. Retreating by instinct, the young man remains on the defensive and asks, scared, what he intends. With an authoritative and direct tone, the elder warns that he wants to know the young man's name. Showing an intimidating smile, the elder orders the guy to answer before he finishes counting to 3. Without wasting time, the man already starts the countdown, speaking slowly. Advancing another heavy and threatening step, he warns, impatient, that only 2 seconds remain. Terror dominates Xian's gaze as soon as the old man finishes the deadline, decreeing the end. Immobilized by dread before the colossal warrior, the protagonist can barely breathe from so much fear. Resting the sword on his shoulder, the old man mocks, warning that he can force the guy to speak. With a total killer look, the elder just decrees that, then, the young man must perish. Xian raises his hands, begging for mercy in despair, which makes the brute laugh, relieved to confirm he wasn't mute. Demanding the answer again, the old man finally makes the guy shout his own name at the top of his lungs. Turning his back, the man classifies the name as pathetic, leaving the guy offended and anxious to know who he's dealing with. In a swift movement, the elder sticks his massive sword into the volcanic ground, raising dust. Looking over his shoulder with imposition, he formally introduces himself as Daoden. Quite irritated, Xian asks what kind of farce that individual is promoting in the middle of that hell. The guy complains intensely about having been insulted gratuitously, and threatened with death without any cause. Even thanking him for having been saved, the young man demands to know if he made any mistake, but is soon interrupted by another insult. Ignoring the guy's indignation, Daoden warns that he was captured by an extremely dangerous magical trap. The elder clarifies calmly that it's a phenomenon in which the dungeon creates another entrance to dissipate the excess energy. The setback is that this opening ends up sucking any nearby living being as a defense mechanism. Laughing out loud, Daoden considers the young man's misfortune impressive, which leads Xian to curse the mine's boss mentally once more. Tired of the gratuitous offenses, the protagonist orders the man to stop calling him an idiot at every turn. Sighing with impatience, the old man grabs the young guy's head by force, demanding that he focus the magic in his eyes to understand the situation. Unable to break free, Xian is forced to obey and condenses the glowing energy into his own pupils. The warrior's guidance echoes through the place, alerting the young man to abandon common vision and see the hidden threat. At that instant, the guy gets a huge scare upon glimpsing the silhouette of a horrifying beast standing exactly beside them. Completely stunned, the protagonist asks what that would be, while the elder celebrates the success of the practical lesson. Observing the creature burning, the guy discovers that it was a stealthy predator that consumes foolish prey without them noticing. Xian is terrified to note that the monster was face to face with him and his organism didn't manifest any danger instinct. Swallowing hard, the young man understands perfectly that he would have become food if it weren't for that elder's direct intervention. Staring at the warrior's broad back in motion, he admits that he's already escaped death on 2 occasions because of him. The surreal skill level and Daoden's coldness lead the protagonist to question how powerful that man really is. Finally, the guy asks who he's dealing with in fact, only to be insulted again by the warrior, who repeats his identity. Irritated by Daoden's answer, the protagonist asks indignant who he is to possess such absurd power and what strange place they are in. Walking calmly through the chaotic scenery, the elder answers that there, inside the dungeon, is his new private hunting ground. Next, the warrior promotes a playful suspense about his own identity. With a look of disdain, the brute orders him to use the magical eyes to figure it out on his own. The sound of something heavy being dragged attracts attention, revealing a mysterious beast emerging among the rocks. Suddenly, the volcanic earth ground starts to radiate an intense glow, with a massive magical circle spreading throughout the entire territory. Dazed by the deafening noise, Xian covers his ears, desperate, wanting to understand what insanity that old man is plotting. Paralyzed by the impact, the young man remains without reaction upon witnessing the absurdity that materializes before him. Terrifying shadows in the shape of wolves emerge from the burning ground around him, leaving the guy terrified by the unusual situation. On the other side of the battlefield, Daoden calls the guy's attention with a shout loaded with impatience. Spinning the heavy sword with brutality, the elder warns that, if he possesses any value, he will have to find a way to survive this alone. Surprised by the sudden attack, Xian curses the demented warrior mentally while retreating. Throwing a punch by instinct to defend himself, he complains, frustrated, about the absurd speed of those shadow beasts. With agility, the protagonist tries to repel the beasts through brute force, but the swarm doesn't cease the attacks. He struggles, irritated to notice that the agile creatures circled his entire body, centralizing the attacks on his left side. In a swift movement, the guy launches a curtain of sand toward the monsters to try to open a breach. The material hits the beasts' faces square on, slowing their advance for a brief instant. However, the volume of enemies is vast and soon the protagonist is pressured on all sides, emitting a groan of pain. Gasping for breath from exhaustion, Xian understands that, even employing his visual powers, he is unable to keep up with the bizarre speed of those beasts. Surrounded by fatal attacks from several directions, the young guy concludes, in a panic, that he will perish if the situation persists. Observing Daoden from a distance, he feels like an idiot for being on the verge of losing his existence after having been spared twice by the elder. Completely lost amidst the chaos, the guy doesn't understand what the warrior is grumbling from far away. The old man points his finger with impatience, complaining that his ears are ringing and he cannot hear the guy's insults clearly. Ignoring the elder's eccentricity, Xian focuses on finding, desperately, a way to see the fast enemies that his eyes do not reach. Daoden's thundering voice echoes through the burning battlefield, calling the guy an idiot and ordering him to come up with something useful. Holding his wounded arm, the protagonist hears the veteran master promise that he will prove exactly the reason for him being so foolish. The brute's instruction is precise, demanding that the young guy focus all the energy in his eyes and raise the purity of his mana immediately. With his pupil glowing in an intense gold, Xian obeys while the warrior instructs him to see through magical perception instead of conventional vision. At that exact moment, a shadow beast shoots at maximum speed, ready to decapitate the guy. Employing the new technique instantly, the guy dodges fluidly from a lethal blow that tears the ground precisely beside him. Understanding the rustic lesson, the guy finally manages to feel the murderous energy of the beasts circulating through the burning environment around him. The creature's reddish aura becomes clear in the smoke's darkness, indicating the exact moment it enters his reach zone. Without hesitating, Xian strikes an impeccable counterattack at the shortest possible distance, tearing the enemy apart with a single gesture. Regaining his breath and looking over his shoulder, he cannot believe that the elder had already calculated all the stages of that evolution. Totally stunned by the warrior's genius, the guy yells, asking what kind of freak that man is, in fact. Laughing like an authentic battle maniac, Daoden slices dozens of monsters through the air, celebrating the fun he hadn't experienced for a long time. A titanic blast of energy tears through the dungeon's ceiling, illuminating the entire cave with the pure power of the old warrior's destruction. With a macabre smile and eyes glowing with adrenaline, the old man, thirsty for blood, starts demanding even more opponents to slaughter. Jumping suicidally straight into the abyss, he challenges the infinite horde of crawling creatures to attack simultaneously. A colossal rocky monster emerges from the depths of the magma, trying to swallow the man in a surprise attack. However, the immense beast is taken down in the blink of an eye, and Daoden's voice echoes through the place, lamenting deeply the creature's weakness. With his sword lowered before the carnage, the old man expresses how disappointing it was not to have managed to even warm up. During his irritated walk through the sea of flames, he laments, nostalgic, the time when dungeons contained many more monsters to annihilate. At a distance, Xian admits internally that he even feels compassion for the brutal beasts before that unstoppable human monster. Silence dominates the vast crater covered by thousands of annihilated corpses, leaving the protagonist mute before the savage massacre. Sighing with relief, the guy comments innocently that it seems the opponents have finally ceased. At that instant, a terrifying shiver runs down the young man's spine, who soon curses his own luck for having spoken prematurely. A violent rumble shakes the entire structure of the dungeon, making the volcanic ground tremble as if it were about to collapse. Unable to maintain his balance, the protagonist staggers backward while crushing pressure dominates the air around him. The impact of the presence is so brutal that Xian falls to his knees, vomiting and struggling not to lose consciousness due to the pain and exhaustion. Coughing excessively, he tries to understand what occurred, and Daoden explains with serenity that it's just the roar of the final boss. The bubbling magma falls in cascades while a colossal silhouette of pure destruction emerges slowly from the boiling lava. Surrounded by magical flames of a blue tone, the legendary beast reveals its overwhelming presence, dominating the entire environment in an instant. In absolute panic, Xian stutters, terrified upon noting that gigantic monstrosity is the true owner of the burning territory. In contrast, the elder displays a savage smile, celebrating, very relieved, that the authentic challenge finally revealed itself there. The bestial creature lets out a deafening roar, announcing its absolute sovereignty and revealing itself to be a dangerous crimson drake. The guy asks if that isn't a dragon in fact, but the warrior refutes, claiming it to be, still, at least a B-level creature. The drake opens its gigantic jaw, accumulating an absurd amount of blue energy, confirming the elder's dangerous suspicions instantly. Upon observing the powerful attack being formed, the experienced fighter notes, impressed, that the creature possesses an active magical dominion field. Daoden mocks the fact that the rookie guy possesses knowledge about dominated areas, explaining that high-level beasts acquire singular combat traits. The old man continues with his improvised class, warning that, if a monster possesses a red aura, its abilities are directed at pure direct combat. However, the magma temperature declines drastically when huge ice peaks start to freeze the region in an impossible way, generated by the blue aura. Without warning, the drake fires a devastating torrent of glacial energy, splitting the abyss structure toward the veteran warrior. Completely desperate with the climatic absurdity, the guy shouts that such a powerful magical type is totally unbalanced and dishonest in a fight. Cutting the logic at the base, a red cross-shaped rift shatters the colossal glacial magic into 1,000 fragments in the air in a single instant. Faced with the absurd visual shock, the protagonist remains silent, just absorbing the impossible scene of the man subjugating the laws of nature right there. He wanders with a blank look that all his brutal effort, previous knowledge, and life experience represent nothing there. The magical beast dives from the heights in mortal fury, proving to the young guy that, near that elder's monumental strength, everything is irrelevant. In a suicidal attack through the icy air, the drake invests at maximum speed, aiming to crush the arrogant man who dared destroy its supreme magic. In the following millisecond, the beast opens its monstrous jaw, ready to devour its insolent prey in a blind blow. Serene and extremely confident, Daoden adjusts his posture, spinning his giant montant to apply a counterattack of overwhelming power. With his musculature tensioned to the maximum, the old warrior advances to meet the imminent danger, emitting a vibrant scream of pure bloodthirsty challenge. As a final fatal resource, the legendary beast concentrates a destructive magical sphere directly inside its clenched fangs, ready to tear apart. Observing the opponent's final despair, the experienced master displays a frightening and sadistic smile from ear to ear. Precisely during the direct confrontation, with the apocalyptic clash of the two extreme forces colliding, the warrior brings the heavy blade down with absolute brutality, crushing the boss against the ground. With a sadistic expression and laughing out loud, the old warrior asks, in a mocking tone, if the blow hurt the drake. Squeezing the handle of his weapon with vigor, he warns the creature not to worry, for he himself will end its suffering, dealing a brutal attack loaded with pure energy. The elder decrees that that is the day of the creature's funeral. The guy runs in despair amidst the chaos, shouting, terrified, that, in fact, the funeral will be his own. Dodging the debris along with the shadow beasts, Xion insults the two maniacs and begs them to resolve that through dialogue. At that moment, the guy is hit by the violent shockwave of the battle and lets out a groan of pain. The legendary beast lets out a thunderous roar while firing a barrage of energy spikes. Struggling to stay standing, the protagonist grumbles, asking them to distance themselves to fight, since just the impact almost annihilates him. A brutal gale hits the region, blinding the guy momentarily and forcing him to cover his face. Completely absorbed in the madness of the confrontation, Daoden laughs uncontrollably, stating that that is truly fun. He provokes the gigantic beast, asking animatedly if it also doesn't feel like it's in an amusement park. Next, an overwhelming attack splits the volcanic earth, raising an absurd amount of debris. Unable to defend himself, Xion is thrown high by the direct impact of the massive explosion. Flying through the air, totally out of control, the guy realizes he's doomed and lets out an insult. The young man's body plummets in freefall straight to the bottom of the scalding abyss, rolling violently through the dungeon's rigid ground. He suffers with the severe impact of the fall. The guy bounces on the burning rocks, unable to stop his own body amidst the destruction. Completely wounded, the protagonist widens his eyes upon noticing something frightening. A threatening glow reflects in his pupil, revealing that death is approaching swiftly. Precisely above him, the crimson drake twists in the air, preparing a concentrated energy attack. However, the old warrior advances right behind, laughing nonstop and asking if that's the most the creature can accomplish. He strikes a brutal blow that sinks the beast's skull into the earth, calling it a shame for dungeon bosses. Even pressed against the ground, the bestial creature persists in accumulating a destructive blue power in its jaws. Noticing the opponent's obstinacy, the master displays an intrigued smile and praises the giant beast's trick. In an instant, a colossal pillar of light erupts from the depths, tearing through the ceiling of the entire cave. Taking advantage of the breach, the monster fires a furious series of deadly and freezing spikes. The beast scans the scenery with its gaze in search of its prey, but hears the man's serene voice emanating from another location. Alarmed by the unexpected presence, the boss raises its skull quickly to the top. From the top, Daoden plummets like a red meteor, crushing everything with his massive sword. With the crushing impact, the monstrous lizard emits a deafening roar of pure agony. Pressing the weapon against the skull of the defeated beast, the elder reveals that he spent an entire year circling the desert just to hunt it. With a serious expression, he explains that the final goal was always to use the beast's heart to forge his magical sword. Staring at the weakened creature coldly, the warrior orders directly for it to simply perish. At that moment, the handle of the massive montant starts to pulse with a sinister and darkened energy. The blade acts like a black hole, consuming and tearing apart the monster's vital essence without compassion. Immediately after, the weapon absorbs all that raw power and acquires an intense reddish glow. The brute raises the newly forged blade, making an aura of pure destruction explode around him. He contemplates the new strength pulsing in his hands, appearing to be very satisfied with the outcome of the massacre. Celebrating with a crooked laugh, the elder praises his own weapon, noting that it became much more powerful. However, the celebration is interrupted by Xian's exhausted voice, who criticizes the old man for talking to a piece of metal. Praising the master's absurd strength, the guy admits his victory, while Daoden is amazed by the fact that the young man didn't turn to ashes. Immersed in the earth and completely shattered, the protagonist confirms that he almost departed for a better place in that insanity. Trying to get up from the rubble, his body wavers and falls backward with no strength. Completely exhausted, the young man hits the dusty ground in a deplorable way. He compresses the earth with trembling hands, frustrated for not being able to sustain his own posture. Realizing an immense effort, Xian pushes the ground and finally manages to rise minimally. Gasping intensely, he celebrates the fact that he survived one more time, considering himself resilient. The guy concludes that his reflexes improved from having been caught in the crossfire, and the brute laughs, praising the idiot's resilience. Stowing the weapon on his back, the warrior warns that the dungeon will soon collapse, and they need to disappear from there. Without understanding absolutely anything, the protagonist observes, apprehensive, and asks the reason for the old man holding him in that way. Instead of answering, the demented elder just lets out a scandalous laugh filled with scorn. In a sudden movement, he launches the guy with force toward a magical portal, wishing farewell to the idiot. Flying through space, Xian shouts, desperate, insulting the master as a wretch and stating that he's worse than his other antagonists. The young man's body crosses the rift, and he falls flat on a bed of sand outside, literally eating sand. He slides through the hot desert, spitting out residue and grumbling from pain. Wiping his mouth, the guy asks where they ended up, and the elder emerges from the rift, explaining that that's the natural exit. Irritated by the throw, Xian questions the reason for not having left walking, but the man orders him to shut up and listen. The veteran confesses that he needs the guy's sand abilities, but emphasizes that he's useless being weak, which is why he will give him a choice. Pointing to the horizon, the master indicates the path back to the metropolis, where the young man can resume his quiet life. Changing the tone, he presents the second option with irony, inviting the young guy to follow him to become a more powerful idiot. Totally surprised by the proposal, the guy stammers, asking for how long he should follow the lunatic. Shrugging, the old man is sincere to say that it could take months or even decades, because the future is uncertain. Pressuring the situation, the warrior demands that the decision be taken at that exact moment. He weighs the comfort of the great metropolis against an infernal journey with a 99% probability of death. In a climate of total tension, both stare at each other while the final choice weighs on the protagonist's shoulders. Wiping the dust from his face, the young guy starts to rise, sketching a cynical little laugh before the proposal. Pointing his finger directly at the formidable master's face, Xian asks, jokingly, if he has gone completely crazy. The guy exposes the absurdity of abandoning the comfort of a warm bed to wander through a wretched desert by his side. Maintaining an imperturbable posture, the elder agrees with serenity that that is, precisely, the idea. With his wounded arm, the boy changes his expression to a determined look and decrees the end of the conversation. Without hesitating or looking back, he marches toward the dangerous horizon, stating that he will accompany the old man. The guy explains that he doesn't swallow old insults, but has full awareness that he is still too weak to seek revenge. Casting a smile of challenge, the protagonist makes it evident that his list of revenges includes the very man who saved him. Staring at the disparity in size, he recognizes that the brute is the most monstrous being he has ever found in his existence. Appreciating the rookie's suicidal courage, Daoden bursts into laughter, guaranteeing that the boy, certainly, will end up dead. With his fist clenched and a determined look, Xian states he is sure he will become more powerful than anyone else if he follows the old man. Displaying a wicked smile, the master warns that, one day, the young guy will still regret such certainty. Without wasting time, the brute orders him to walk soon, since the route is long, while the guy grumbles, asking not to be called an idiot. The sun beats down without mercy in the firmament of that ruthless desert. Completely exhausted and sweating cold, Xian begs the veteran to reduce the pace. He complains that they've been walking continuously for 6 hours and begs, at least, for a brief pause. However, the warrior continues marching with his back turned, ignoring the young man's clamor completely. Irritated by the silence, the protagonist shouts, asking the reason for the old man not uttering a single word, criticizing those sudden mood swings. Feeling his skin burn, he suffers with that absurd heat, estimating that the temperature must be reaching unsustainable levels. Sinking with every step into the soft sand, the young guy understands that, Soon, he will suffer severe sunstroke or perish from dehydration. Unable to endure, the guy collapses to his knees, feeling lost, while the master points out how ridiculous he is for not using even 1% of his own gift. The elder sticks his sword into the ground and considers it pathetic that the guy suffers to walk on a terrain where he himself possesses the aptitude to manipulate sand. Holding his head in despair, Xian shouts that talking is truly simple, remembering that he awakened his gifts only a few days ago. With the maximum indifference in the world, the brute replies, asking what the relevance of that is. At that point, the protagonist argues that he's just a low-class combatant and not someone of high rank like the lunatic there. Shouting with anger before the young guy's face, Daoden orders him to cease uttering nonsense, caring little about his power classification. He humiliates the guy, asking if he supposes that someone is already born into the elite, ensuring that the strong were just fortunate in life. Speeding up his step during the sermon, the master asks if the young guy will give up for not having been blessed, remembering that, for common individuals, he is already a man of great luck. Completely silent from the brutal reprimand, the guy reflects on such a blessing he received. Resuming the march in a grumpy way, the old man orders him to cease the whining and find a way to employ his ability instead of having a useless brain. Observing his own hands in the middle of the desert, the young guy realizes that, at the end of the day, that power belongs exclusively to him. From a distance, the master's voice echoes, saying it is the rookie's duty to understand how to break his own limits and discover how to use his strength alone. Employing effort not to give up definitely, Xian leans on his own arm to try to lift himself from the burning ground. Being threatened with death if he doesn't solve the situation, the guy breaks down and shouts back, saying he already understood the message. With determination, he takes a heavy step onto the unstable dunes to test a new idea. Focusing all his energy, the protagonist activates his special ability, making a sand gale swirl around him. Evaluating his reach, the young guy understands that he can dominate a radius of 5 meters and decides that that should suffice for the plan. He notes that the sand is very deep and concludes that, if he finds a way to solve the terrain issue, he will save quite a bit of breath. With that in mind, the guy compresses the loose grains under his boot, creating a truly more rigid surface to walk on. Excited about the test's success, he celebrates that, now, his feet don't sink anymore and walking has become extremely simple. However, the happiness is brief upon feeling his mana run out too quickly, noting that he will need to discard the technique for not being able to maintain it for a prolonged period. Changing the strategy, the guy tries to focus the energy directly into his legs, feeling immediate relief in the effort to execute the steps. Observing the disciple blend distinct ideas and use his mind to solve the problem, the elder sighs nostalgic, recalling his own youth. Despite the young guy tripping and falling several times on the dry earth, the master considers interesting the fact that he simply refuses to throw in the towel. Analyzing the absurd evolution, the veteran notes that the guy's energy mastery has already ascended a level in a record period of learning. After vast effort, the young guy finally finds the perfect balance and celebrates upon seeing that the bizarre tactic is truly effective. Full of pride, he runs to the brute to demonstrate that. Now, he manipulates only the precise grains under his soles, facilitating his trajectory. Mocking the master, the guy mocks, ensuring he walks in luxury now and challenges the warrior to do the same. The immediate reply for the audacity comes in the form of a precise and heavy punch straight to the top of the petulant one's head. Fallen to the ground, feeling pain, the protagonist hears the old man criticize his irritation and warn that wasting energy on futilities is a fast shortcut to death. The young guy's body goes out definitely in the sand, forcing the master to panic, shouting for the unconscious one not to stop breathing. Opening his eyes with immense difficulty amidst the darkness, Xian grumbles softly, trying to understand where he ended up. Accommodated close to an improvised bonfire, the grumpy elder warns that the useless one regained consciousness and criticizes the precious time he wasted because of his fault. Receiving a piece of mysterious food, the guy notes that his entire body is covered in bandages and serious wounds. Staring at the extremely rigid and dehydrated meat in his hands, he feels indignant at the pathetic dinner he received. Ordering the guy to consume in silence, the veteran decides to take advantage of the break to narrate an old story from when he was still just a young warrior. He explains that, in the past, the fragile didn't need to worry about their own survival, since the strong felt genuine pride in protecting defenseless people. Reflecting on contemporary cruelty, the elder laments that the world has transformed so much, admitting he never managed to get used to the brutality of the new era. With no tolerance for drama, the master issues a dry ultimatum, ordering the guy to remain stretched out if he wishes to perish soon, or find strength to get up alone until the end. Chewing the meat like a shoe sole with immense difficulty. The protagonist agrees with the sermon, sitting on the cold sand. Staring at the pitch black, the guy remains thoughtful, absorbing the weight of the words and the melancholy trajectory of that robust old man. Amidst the silence of the camp, he recognizes the immense baggage that the brute carries and tries to imagine the amount of memories accumulated over so many decades of battles. Observing the warrior closely, Xian understands that the poor man cannot even grind the rigid meat, needing to soften the meal only with saliva due to his advanced age. Understanding the survival trick to save water in such a dry place, he grumbles softly, lamenting not having received the tip before almost fracturing his teeth. With a slight trace of respect, the young guy deduces that the rude attitudes are, in truth, precious lessons to teach how to fish instead of handing everything over on a silver platter. Returning to the walk through the freezing vastness, the guy breaks his own philosophy, remembering that, being sincere, he never even witnessed a real fish in his existence. Before the starry firmament, the petulant one loses his shame and requests another piece of the terrible meat, but is ordered to shut his mouth immediately. At that moment, the cutting night wind hits the guy's wounded body, which lets out a powerful sneeze, unable to control himself. Trembling uncontrollably, hugging his own shoulders, he suffers with the absurd drop in temperature, cursing that bizarre environment. To aggravate the fatigue, he complains, frustrated, for not having managed to close his eyes the previous night, since the lunatic master spent hours talking to his own sword in the darkness. Desperate for a drop of hydration, the guy opens his mouth to ask for water, and is surprised when the old man squeezes his soaked hair directly into his throat. Feeling deep aversion for the disgusting technique, the guy pulls away, expelling the impure water, indignant at another repugnant survival secret not shared. With the pieces of the puzzle fitting together, he understands that the strategy is to collect dew from the clothes, finally understanding the reason for the camp resembling a huge clothesline. Staring at the veteran with murderous anger, the young guy swears internally that he will become powerful enough to take revenge for such humiliation soon. Interrupting the oath of revenge, the brute asks if he feels the danger approaching, and the guy answers defensively with sarcasm. Without understanding the warrior's sudden alert, Xian immobilizes himself in the middle of the path with a confused expression. Soon after, a disturbing tremor starts to rise through his bare feet, indicating that a real herd is moving under them. Splitting the dawn's shadows, a gigantic pack of demonic beasts surrounds the two warriors in the middle of absolute nothingness. Displaying huge horns and jaws thirsty for blood, the mutant hyenas charge furiously, attacking the invaders at a truly unusual time for the species. Drawing his muntant from his back with serenity, Daoden transfers the responsibility to the rookie, asking if he cries for help or if he will solve the problem alone. Without granting margin for rest, the most aggressive beast of the pack leaps straight at its prey's throat, growling in a peculiar way. Disregarding the monstrous threat that advances in his direction, the protagonist points his thumb to his own chest, displaying a smile loaded with arrogant confidence. Completely surrounded on all sides in the darkness, he opens his arms, facing death face to face, shouting with all his soul that he will take care of that and survive by his own means. With a snap of fingers, a sharp sand blade starts to swirl rapidly around his hand, revealing that the mana domination evolved to combat. Dominating the entire terrain, a massive sandstorm detonates. Focusing all the accumulated energy, the protagonist maintains a sharp gaze amidst total chaos. Huge sand stakes erupt from the ground violently, piercing the beasts that were advancing. He curses at the monsters, furious, wanting to know how many of those wretched individuals still remain there. Holding his gasping arm, the young guy understands that he will exhaust his mana and perish before being devoured if he doesn't come up with a plan. Staring at the infinite horde, Xian concludes that brute force is irrelevant now, needing efficient attacks. The guy tries, desperately, to focus his mind to find a way to fight, consuming truly less energy. At that point, he extends his hand forward, prepared to test a new combat tactic. However, a hyena attacks by surprise, biting his left arm while he complains, insulting the cowardly beast. Bleeding copiously, the protagonist grumbles that the beast sank its teeth, opening an authentic hole in his arm. Staring at his own serious wound, that conception of a hole provokes a brilliant insight in his mind. The enraged pack persists in advancing without interruption, wishing to slaughter the rookie in any way. Soon the demonic beasts close the siege, moving rapidly through the nocturnal desert. Processing the plan in an insane way, Xian understands that it's enough to generate small perforations in the targets. In an extremely fast movement, he fires a thin sand projectile that pierces the monster's skull. The guy starts laughing, understanding that he doesn't need to explode the beasts, since a hole in the skull kills in the same way. Focused on control, the young guy wonders that wasting mana in a panic only accelerates his own end. Firing precise bullets, he celebrates the strategy of employing the minimum lethality for the lowest energy cost. Totally enthusiastic about the massacre, the guy laughs upon noting that even the master takes down the targets one by one. In the distance, the old warrior laughs at the creature, warning that that attack seemed only like Karis's. A colossal hyena with reddish eyes stares at the elder, who insults it as a filthy mutt. Drawing his sword, Daoden warns that he cannot allow a canine that bites others to survive. The veteran displays a maniacal and frightening smile, completely thirsty for more carnage. Alarmed by the distant aura, the protagonist retreats, desperate, understanding that the elder will promote more insanity. Shouting at the top of his lungs, the warrior decrees that, now, the true massacre will begin. A devastating explosion of reddish energy splits the battlefield, annihilating everything in its path. Hit by the brutal shockwave, Xian is thrown back while shouting, trying to sustain himself. Gasping from exhaustion, the guy criticizes the brute's insanity for firing attacks like that with individuals nearby. A colossal trench covered in blood and monster remains embedded in the desert sand. Standing on the edge of the crater, the guy asks, haunted, if the master is human for performing such a feat without magic. Sweating cold, he chooses to remain silent from then on, but is interrupted by a growl coming from below. The alpha beast roars loud while the master criticizes the noise and mocks the creature for promoting such a scandal. The monstrous animal growls with fury, releasing dangerous electrical sparks throughout its entire body. Surprised by the force field, Daoden notices instantly that that creature belongs, at the very least, to rank B. A storm of violent lightning consumes the elder completely amidst the nocturnal desert. Witnessing the scene, the protagonist shouts, desperate, for the old man to be cautious with the magic. The veteran receives the impact of the severe electrical discharge without managing to dodge the overwhelming attack. Completely paralyzed by amazement, the young guy remains speechless, assuming the man was defeated. However, the warrior just enjoys the electricity, praising the tingling for relieving the tensions of his shoulders. With a totally diabolical look, the elder decrees, coldly, that now the massage session has ended. Employing absurd brute force, he crushes the giant beast skull against the ground in a single blow. Laughing nervously, Xian understands that he was a fool for worrying, choosing to ignore that monster to preserve his own mental health. The old man returns holding the beast's skull, while the guy asks, animated, if they will leave there already. Curious about the horn, the young guy hears the master explain that that electrical item will constitute an excellent weapon if well refined. In a swift movement, the brute throws an object through the air, ordering the disciple to grab it. Wielding the old dagger, Xian is warned, dryly, that now he will have to hunt his own sustenance without depending on others. Slicing the monster, the warrior clarifies that the musculature is toxic, however the flank meat is pure and safe for consumption. The elder notices the guy's look and orders him to move with speed, insulting the rookie, since the sun will rise soon. Awakening to reality, Xian agrees, stammering while the day rises, setting the horizon on fire. During the lively walk, the protagonist chews the piece of meat, considering the meal wonderful. Wiping sweat from his face, he grumbles that thirst is intense, however he strives to be satisfied with a nourished stomach. With the new ability active, the guy advances through the dunes with the maximum ease of existence. Full of audacity, the petulant one provokes the brute, asking if he feels envy and ordering him to be cautious with his age. The immediate reply is a punch straight to the face, which throws the young guy's head with force backward. Striking an agile jump, Xian manages to dodge the second attack, bursting into laughter for having escaped unharmed this time. Irritated by the clowning around, the old man calls the guy demented for bragging, just for mastering a cheap magic. On his knees in the sand, the young guy begs for mercy, remembering that he suffers from thirst and didn't deserve to kiss the ground. Complaining about the vacuum, the guy interrupts the conversation suddenly upon feeling a strange breeze, loaded with humidity in the air. Initially, the guy supposes it to be a delirium, however soon notices the master's fixed look pointing to the same direction. A breath of hope arises, indicating the almost improbable presence of an oasis amidst that burning hell. Side by side on the high dunes, the two travelers stare at the scalding scenery, waiting for the next destination. With eyes glowing with euphoria, Xian celebrates, disbelieving, for finally finding something he only glimpsed in reports. Clear water reflects sunlight, revealing a perfect oasis carved in the middle of that sand valley. Desperate from thirst, the guy shoots like a madman, computing the days he spent with his throat totally dried out. Further back, on the hill, the master clicks his tongue with a suspicious expression, sensing there is something truly wrong there. Sliding down the steep slope, the protagonist shouts, relieved, celebrating the salvation he had waited for so much. Without pondering, the guy dives headfirst with clothes and everything, sinking into the cool water of the pond. Floating on the surface, he emits a heavy sigh, enjoying every drop of water soaking his exhausted body. Freshness dominates him, bringing an absurd relief after suffering so much in those infernal 50-degree temperatures. Totally relaxed, the young guy's vision starts to blur in a strange way while he murmurs, confused. Right below in the dark water, a glowing and truly hot light bulb attracts his attention at the bottom of the well. Completely hypnotized by the glow, the guy goes on losing consciousness, complaining of sudden drowsiness. Precisely at that instant, the brute's thundering voice echoes, ordering at the top of his lungs for the idiot to wake up to life promptly. In an incredibly fast jump, the old warrior draws his heavy sword and invests with everything through the air. He shortens the distance in the blink of an eye, falling like a meteor straight toward the shallow lake. A gigantic sand abyssal fish emerges from the water, opening sharp jaws, ready to devour the guy completely. Holding the young man by the shirt collar, the master retracts the rookie abruptly. The strange creature emerges, splitting the water and exposing its grotesque and colossal body. Thrown through the air, Xian gets a terrible scare upon contemplating the danger up close. The veteran lands firmly on the sand, protecting the apprentice from the lethal attack. Wielding his sword with vigor, he prepares for the counterattack. In a single overwhelming movement, the elder fires a brutal cut that split the water. Shocked at the scene, the protagonist finally understands that that was the famous desert mirage. The beast falls dead, split in half, while a rainbow forms from the dissipated magic. The brute clarifies that that bug attracts prey through the light on its forehead to devour them. Staring at the guy, the warrior assumes a truly intimidating posture. Without any patience, he strikes a heavy punch precisely on the disciple's head. Fallen on the sand, the guy hears the master shout that he forgot all the training solely for having mastered one trick. Totally irate, the old man warns that idiots like that are the first to perish in that place. Trembling with dread, Xian agrees instantly while trying to recover from the reprimand. At that instant, the elder orders him to skin the monster, leaving the guy completely without understanding anything. The warrior explains that the beast's ventral region is malleable and ideal for sewing a tunic. Observing with seriousness, he questions if the young man needs new clothing. However, soon he starts shouting, ordering him to make his own tunic and asking if his brain has petrified. The guy just apologizes, embarrassed, trying to appease the situation again. Evaluating the corpse, the protagonist observes that the bug resembles the fish of Earth quite a lot. The veteran comments that the young guy, probably, never witnessed a real fish. With sincerity, the guy confirms it being his first experience before an animal of that nature. Wielding the dagger, he murmurs, tense, that fish are truly frightening. The young guy tries to drive the blade over the beast's back. However, he doesn't generate any real damage. Mocking, the elder asks if he intends to pet the creature and warns that he will solve it alone. Refusing the help, the guy grumbles that the leather is truly rigid and works out a strategy. Focused on the task, he starts to focus all his magical energy on the cutting weapon. The goal is to wrap the blade with mana to considerably raise its piercing power. Soon he plans to use the fine fins to work out an improvised needle. Finalizing the project, he concludes that he can extract the tendons from the meat to serve as sewing thread. Sitting at a distance, the master ridicules upon seeing the apprentice transform the monster's fragments into debris. Sighing deeply, the old man warns that vast material still remain to try again. Time passes and the night collapses heavily on the immensity of the sand desert. Raising the piece to the air, Xian shouts, hallucinating, celebrating that he finally managed to finish the service. Truly proud of the creation, he guesses that the tunic remains so excellent that he could, even, sell it in the city. The brute requests his attention, while the guy hugs the clothing with fear of being looted. Ordering the petulant one to cease the freshness, the elder extends a gigantic organ of the beast so he consumes it. Without understanding, the young guy hears that that bladder is a rare remedy and needs to be ingested completely. Totally impatient, the veteran warns that, in case he doesn't consume that, he will perish on the path. Throwing the massive piece into the disciple's lap, the master criticizes the fact that his arm is already fatigued. Staring at the repugnant meat, The young guy swallows hard, prepared to face the day's worst challenge. Through an immense effort, he deals the first bite, grumbling that the bitter taste is preferable to death. Chewing without interruption, the protagonist gets truly confused with the bizarre texture of the fresh food. The guy notes that the meat resembles a cloud and doesn't satisfy the stomach, no matter how much he chews. Finalizing the last bite quickly, he is soon summoned again by the grumpy old man. Accommodated serenely close to the bonfire, the veteran decrees that, now, it is the moment to expend energy. Confused by the speech, the guy suddenly notices his own chest radiating intense glow. Excruciating pain dominates his organism, making him expel blood while shouting, agonizing from the burning. Holding his stomach, desperate, he notices that internal heat becomes truly unbearable to resist. The protagonist feels the mana go crazy, stating there is a true sun destroying his stomach. Shouting at the top of his lungs under absurd pain, he hears only the master order him to support the ordeal in silence. Observing the gloomy night, the old man philosophizes that everything there resembles that oasis and, soon, will perish in the quicksand. Finalizing the deep reasoning, he adds that even monsters are reborn in the depths, returning one more time. The brute states that that is the ruthless cycle of existence, ignoring completely the apprentice's claimers in the back of the scene. Unable to support the continuous torment, the young guy begs, in tears, to be freed soon from that infernal torture. Losing sanity completely, he swears to eliminate the elder for subjecting him to a calvary like that. Adjusting his body on the impure ground, the warrior orders the guy to cease the claimers, for he tries to rest in peace. The day dawns serene and the petulant one regains consciousness, unclosing his eyes slowly under the hot and malleable sand. The master's face appears inverted precisely in his vision, asking if the useless one already awakened from his nap. The jolt is titanic, making the protagonist jump backward, insulting the old man for almost causing a heart attack. Laughing at the guy's expression, the elder comments that he slept truly well, while the petulant one complains that he only fainted. The warrior soon asks how he feels, and the guy starts the verification of his own body, truly admired. Clenching his fist with vigor, the rookie notices that something altered drastically in his musculature suddenly. Completely stunned, he notes that his muscles resemble steel cables and mana circulates like a violent storm. Confused by the absurd ascension, the young guy asks himself how he managed to become so powerful out of nowhere and with such speed. Walking through the scalding desert, the veteran reveals that all that brand new strength comes from the consumed beast's bladder. The rare organ grants immense resistance to heat, equivalent to a valuable refined mana stone. Surprised by the precious information, Xian asks if there is no problem in wasting something so expensive with an individual like him. Laughing thunderously, the brute states that he only performed that favor because the guy is truly weak and needs to be useful on the journey. Sitting with comfort to consume the roasted meat, the master warns that they will not depart until everything is finalized. After 4 whole days of uninterrupted consumption, the warrior notes that a quantity truly superior to what was predicted remained. Leaving camp definitely, he communicates to the loyal disciple that, finally, the moment to return to the walk on the sand has arrived. Completely reinvigorated by the food and the miraculous remedy, the guy obeys the command with immense excitement. Facing a sinister sandstorm, Xian celebrates the fact that the hostile wind now resembles a breeze. Following the veteran warrior's firm steps, he remains impressed by the brute's immense resistance. Walking amidst the sand torment, Xian grumbles mentally that the elder doesn't utter a word for days. The guy asks if the master is going through menopause. Frustrated by the 2 weeks of uninterrupted journey, the protagonist wonders if the veteran knows even the destination he pursues. Suddenly, a gigantic insect monster emerges violently from the sand precisely beside the guy, emitting a shrill squeal. Looking over his shoulder, Deodan orders, dryly, for the guy to shut up amidst the storm. Exhausted, the guy sighs, asking about the remaining distance to the destination. However, he feels an impact pushing him forward. Immediately, he turns his face, noticing the threat approaching swiftly behind his back. The massive mutant ant snaps its sharp jaws, demonstrating to be a creature endowed with a truly rigid shell. Observing his own feat, Xian laments that he wanted only to transit without mishaps, recognizing that the situation will not be truly simple. A panoramic view reveals that both are completely surrounded by dozens of those beasts, structuring a deadly web. Accepting the combat, the guy bends down, touching the sand with his hands and ordering all enemies to invest simultaneously. Firing sharp stakes from the ground, he warns that he needs to annihilate the monsters with speed, or he will be eliminated by the master due to the delay. The monstrous creatures emit squeals of agony upon being pierced without compassion by the attacks coming from below. Pointing his fingers like firearms, the protagonist fires small projectiles, praising the obedience of the pierced targets. The magic bullets split the air, whizzing toward the implacable swarm. Raising his skull with a sharp look, the young guy concludes that fighting during storms is excellent for possessing infinite ammunition flying around him. Searching around, Xian notes that the old man disappeared suddenly and shouts, revolted for having been abandoned alone there. Running through the soft sand, he grumbles that the warrior lacks any loyalty, understanding the reason for being a lonely elder. At that moment, the young guy freezes his steps abruptly, hoping internally that the veteran hasn't overheard the offenses. The guy's look changes instantly, prepared to request forgiveness from the master in case the heavy aura in the air was his. Maintaining the survival instinct to the limit, he strikes a jump backward, reacting instantly to a dangerous presence on the terrain. Sliding his feet over the ground to stop the momentum, the protagonist understands that the danger detected now is something completely out of the ordinary. The magical pressure that hits the apprentice's organism doesn't belong to a common monster, but to the purest and absolute invisible terror. A colossal army of gigantic ants plummets down the sand dune like a true demonic avalanche of paws and claws. Surrounded by the immense horde, the guy is totally terrified, wanting to understand where that absurd quantity of insects arose from. Sweating cold due to despair, he turns his face, shouting for the veteran and warning, in tears, that there are too many enemies there. Distant from the front line, Daoden just contemplates the chaos, standing with serenity on the dry earth. Clenching his teeth with vigor, the apprentice understands that he cannot pass the rest of his existence begging for help like a fragile being. Changing his posture, the guy concludes that the brute was already aware of the army, which denotes that being one more suicidal mission. A wave of maniacal adrenaline dominates Xian, who decides to crush those cursed insects, regardless of the quantity. Without hesitating, he materializes violent sand explosions that sweep away the first monsters trying to approach for the slaughter. However, his self-confidence disappears with speed when the protagonist suffers a severe jolt straight to the chest. Unable to balance himself, the guy's body is thrown to the other side by a new stealthy attack. Prematurely, he abandons all the audacity of yesteryear, cursing intensely while falling backward, swallowed by thousands of furious beasts. Agonizing on the ground, the guy struggles, criticizing the swarm's cowardice and demanding they come to fight in an equitable combat, face to face. Staring at the sharp jaws ready to tear him apart, the young guy emits an insult, accepting the mortal attack coming from above. Employing the torment to his advantage, he detonates a massive mana explosion under his own body, throwing the beasts at a distance. Taking advantage of the perfect breach in the dust cloud, the petulant one jumps with all his strength, splitting the air to escape the lethal siege. Contemplating the carnage from high up, he observes, perplexed, the vastness of the anthil dominating the entire scalding valley. A passing relief arises, and the guy plans to look for an elevated terrain to analyze the situation, celebrating that the insects don't possess the capacity to fly. Cutting the logic at the base, a dry impact hits the guy's back with extreme brutality. To Xian's absolute disgrace, a gigantic winged ant captures his body in full flight. The young guy's pupils contract in pure dread, considering it impossible for a creature of that species to possess functional wings. The flying beast sinks its paws into the apprentice's organism, emitting a disturbing squeal directly in his ear. In a merciless dive, the mutant bug advances at high speed, returning to the ground, dragging the prey without defense. With the sharp clash against the rigid earth, air is expelled violently from the guy's lungs, who expels blood, twisting his face. Raising his truly wounded and bloodied expression, his look glows with an unbreakable willpower. High up the ravine, the old warrior listens to the disciple whisper his name, crying for attention. An expression of pure obstinacy and irrational challenge dominates the face of the wounded young guy. Cornered again by bestial shadows, the young guy shouts for the brute to watch from a box seat how he will escape that hell alive. Satisfied with the petulant one's posture, Daoden praises, in a low voice, that idiot's stubborn spirit. Internally, the master recognizes that, in a world reduced to dust, the guy could, perfectly, use that singular gift to reside in the greatest luxury possible. However, the weight on the veteran's conscience alerts him that that simple path would decree the end of any authentic evolution. Contemplating the dense tornadoes in the valley, he condemns individuals who reside in illusions, reinforcing that an Awaken needs to evolve their own gifts. In his mind, the elder rejects the idea of forging just one more mediocre soldier, produced on an assembly line and without a soul. the scars of the past haunt him severely, rescuing the sorrows of when the world's end occurred. The vision of a colossal destructive lightning, splitting the metropolis of 100 years ago, burns clear in his tired memory. Absolute impotence before the city crumbling makes the warrior relive the agony of witnessing existences extinguishing themselves in vain before his eyes. That apocalypse of flames devoured colleagues, neighbors, the entire family lineage, and even the daughter he loved so much. Extending his empty hands in the agonizing memory, he admits to having been the greatest loser for failing miserably in protecting his world. Focusing again on the arduous combat in the valley, the master reflects that the guy avoided following that route of cowardice. The warrior believes faithfully that, upon crossing the thin boundary between existence and the end, the apprentice will reach any level he aims for. A light and sincere feeling of pride flourishes in the lonely warrior's mind. Commanding deadly cyclones with his hands, the protagonist proves that the evolution generated by the survival instinct is brutal. Overflowing with uncontrolled energy, the petulant one stares at the beasts, ecstatic, asking if they already sense they will be crushed right there. A gigantic ant drags itself through the sand, disregarding completely the level of absurd pressure focused in the air. Joining the grains through magic, the young guy works out a massive drill, forming the densest and heaviest projectile possible. The improvised armament splits the field, tearing through the gale in a straight line. Joining wind power, gravity, and raw mana in a single shot, the impact annihilates the monster completely. Raising his arms with imposition, the guy notes, shouting, that the new ability multiplied his original damage countless times. Shouting with an overwhelming aura surrounding him, Xian decrees to the horde that, now, the instant of total extermination has arrived. Detonating the battlefield's nucleus, the guy blames the beasts themselves for having been incompetent in assassinating him earlier. Witnessing the luminous spectacle, the brute crosses his arms, serene, admiring the exacerbated enthusiasm of his irresponsible pupil. Completely out of breath due to fatigue, the disciple survives in the dust while the perforated carcasses rain shattered around. A monumental crater disfigures the ancestral sands of the desert, sealing the guy's definitive victory against the legendary Anthil. Coughing excessively, the protagonist tries to recover his breath after expending so much energy. Soon he shouts for the old man, wishing to know if he witnessed that, but ends up expelling more blood. At that instant, a shadow covers the guy, who widens his eyes, without understanding how that occurred. Emerging from nothing behind his back, a bizarre beast captures the guy's organism with its sharp claws. Feeling the blood run, he discards the idea of stealth and understands he was poisoned. The apprentice understands instantly that that poison blocks his mana points. Completely revolted, Xian insults the monsters, considering it unfair to be captured in that way. However, a dry blow hits his skull with everything. Fallen in darkness, he emits an insult, understanding that the situation degraded definitely. Unclosing his eyes slowly, the young guy observes several pairs of reddish eyes and deduces he finds himself in the nest. Stretched out on the cold ground, repulsive insect noises start to echo through the dark tunnel. Observing those crawling creatures approaching, the guy understands they are larvae. The petulant one tries to react in any way, however his arm remains completely paralyzed. One of the gigantic larvae already contacts its jaws with his defenseless organism, ready to bite. Noting that his organism doesn't respond, the guy concludes that he will be devoured alive precisely there. Accepting the end, the protagonist only wonders how to proceed with death so close. Waiting for his existence to pass like a movie before his eyes, he questions if everything ends there. The repulsive larvae continue crawling, greedy, toward their fresh prey. However, in a violent impulse, the guy's fist clenches with vigor, tearing the earth. The ants around retreat, terrified by the sudden movement of that snack. Trembling due to the effort, Xian forces his body upward, insulting his own weakness. In a burst of pure anger, he shouts that he didn't enjoy an excellent life and refuses to perish in a futile way. The bracelet on his arm starts to glow intensely while he insults the insects with all his hatred. An absurd blast of dark energy sweeps the nest floor in a snap of fingers. The smaller monsters are thrown at a distance without the slightest chance of reacting to the pressure. With the brutal impact, the destructive gale persists in throwing the beasts against the walls. The entire cave trembles violently, raising a suffocating dust cloud in the environment. Taking advantage of the breach, the petulant one employs mana to raise a sand pillar, escaping the beasts. Observing his own hands, he notes, surprised, that the poison was eradicated and his energy overflows like never before. Staring at the luminous display on his wrist, the apprentice finally understands that he ascended a level. Feeling the new strength, the protagonist states that his current power doesn't even compare to the rank F trash. Even with that absurd increase of energy, the young guy's look remains tense and focused. Staring at the gigantic queen ant, he feels indignant for it not having suffered a single scratch. Sliding through the walls with ease, the colossal beast advances implacably after its target. The monster grinds solid rock as if it were sand, leaving the guy shocked with so much brute force. Unstoppable, the creature shoots through the tunnel, raising deadly spikes wherever it transits. Dodging by little, Xian complains, frustrated, for his previous blows not having provoked even tickles. Holding onto the wall not to plummet, he admits it being impossible to win a direct combat in that way. Observing the glowing eyes in the dust, the petulant one understands that facing head-on will not yield any effect. At that point, the guy's mind starts to operate with speed, seeking a way to get around that defense. He concludes that he needs to find a way to strip the shell, without the need for piercing. The grotesque beast emits a deafening hiss, preparing for the final blow. Focusing all mana in his hand, the apprentice decides that he will twist and tear the armor completely. Noticing the threat, the mutant insect shouts even louder, investing with everything against the enemy. Without hesitating, the young guy deals a concentrated spinning blow straight to the creature's skull. The energy spirals violently while the protagonist tries to tear the beast from inside out. However, the guy brings his hands to his skull, shouting in pain upon being hit by an absurd sound wave. The queen starts to emit a truly strong sharp frequency, which threatens to pop the target's brain. A massive shockwave sweeps the space, distorting even the air around the combat. Bleeding from his face, the petulant one grinds his teeth, revolted for the monster having hidden such a trick. However, the survival instinct speaks louder, and he opts to bet everything on one last attack. Releasing every drop of remaining mana, the dust storm around reaches chaotic proportions. Without worrying about the damage to his own organism, the young guy decides to test who will fall first. Shouting at the top of his lungs with blood on his face, Xian invests, willing to fight until the end. Then, an absolute silence dominates the cave when the final impact hits its apex. The flash ceases, and the guy remains without understanding the reason for not being able to feel his limbs anymore. Toppling backward, he notices, with bitterness, that he finally surpassed the organism's physical limit. Collapsing in darkness, the apprentice insults his own structure for being truly fragile and useless at the decisive hour. However, before hitting the rigid ground, the veteran brute holds him firmly by the shoulders, calling him weak. Carrying the unconscious guy, Daoden warns, with a tone of sarcasm, that resting there would be an invitation to the end of life. Displaying a crooked smile, all shattered, the petulant one stammers the master's name, relieved. The warrior displays a wide smile, confessing that he reserved the final blow for the brat to prove his capacity. Observing the destroyed carcass of the queen, the elder praises the apprentice's courage in fighting until the end. Maintaining audacity, the young guy warns that his eardrums were ruptured in the fight, and he doesn't hear absolutely anything. Finding humor in others' misfortune, the old man just shouts truly louder close to the deaf guy's ear. Being dragged by the collar of his clothing without any care, Xian tries to discover their destination. Both enter a hidden chamber in the depths of the anthil, illuminated by a mysterious light. Leaning on the ground, the guy widens his eyes, confused upon coming across a glowing sphere on the pedestal. Without understanding absolutely anything of what he found, he turns his face, asking the veteran about the nature of that. Pushing the petulant one's head without any pity, Daoden orders him to consume the queen's egg like a strawberry remedy. The protagonist emits a mental insult, disgusted by the simple idea of depositing that repugnance in his mouth. Staring at the glowing sphere up close, he doubts it's even physically feasible to swallow something of those proportions. Half suspicious, the guy asks if that won't provoke truly severe abdominal pain, just as occurred earlier. The brute replies with sarcasm that probably will lead him to death. However, the young guy remains without listening. Sighing deeply to accept the fate, Xian bites the glowing sphere, in the hope of not perishing from indigestion. Chewing the glowing sphere, the guy admits, internally, that he doesn't possess the slightest notion of what the real taste of a strawberry is. However, as soon as the object runs through his throat, his eyes glow upon understanding that the item is truly delicious. Excited, he would question even the existence of another exemplar. However, he feels something truly strange occurring in his own organism suddenly. Falling to his knees, the petulant one summons the old man in total panic, without understanding what occurs to him. It happens that such inversion of organs has begun, a bizarre process in which the individual's bowels twist and become inside out. Such event manifests itself, seeing that the queen's egg is truly toxic and forces the internal content of the unfortunate one's organism to purge through the pores. In short, whoever ingests that bomb possesses the bowels split by internal spikes until suffering a terrible and agonizing end. Howling from pain with the organism exploding in sharp spikes, Xian shouts at the top of his lungs, wishing to understand what poison the master administered to him. Scratching his ear with the maximum tranquility of existence, Daodan criticizes the noise and warns that the guy needs to get used to this to survive. Totally distended and with a swollen face, the apprentice only asks how someone manages to support such torment. Unable to sustain the pressure, the protagonist initiates a violent cough while expelling a dark substance onto the cave floor. Losing vigor completely, he lets out one last insult, already sensing that his physical structure reached the absolute limit. Collapsing in darkness, the young guy laments that existence of trash, saddened for having assumed that, finally, he could trust someone in fact. With his face glued to the cold earth, the guy accepts that, at the end of the day, he was truly a fool for believing in the brute. At that instant, his body remains completely static on the stone ground, surrounded by the immense spikes that split his own flesh. Disregarding the petulant unconscious one, the elder bends down close to the repugnant carcass of the queen, and to obtain his deserved reward. Without any ceremony, he introduces his hand with everything into the mutilated bowels of the beast and extracts what he sought in there. Staring at the glowing stone, the elder displays a malicious laugh and celebrates for having achieved success with that high-level mana jewel. Taking advantage of the diligence, he observes that the rest of the giant insect will also be truly useful and opts to store everything. Storing the items in the bag, the veteran rises, adjusting the sword on his back, and turns his gaze with serenity to the apprentice's body. With an expression slightly heavier and darker, the warrior whispers the word friend, as if he dialogued with an old partner of the past. Observing the petulant one full of spikes, he justifies in a low voice that the fragile perish and that is, simply, his undeniable fate. Thus, the brute turns his back to the corpse stretched out on the stone and initiates the slow departure through the lonely tunnel. Continuing the imaginary dialogue, the old man states that it's impossible to avoid such outcome, since they are truly running out of time to act. However, breaking the tragic silence of the cave, a fragile and confused voice echoes, asking the reason for still persisting in breathing. Turning his face immediately, Daodan displays a huge smile and asks, animated, if the big fool finally awakened from his rest. As a direct response, an absurd explosion of dark energy raises a cloud of dust, obscuring the entire vision of the region where the guy remained thrown. Protecting his face with his arm, the master insults the insolent petulant one, wishing to know what farce that is of raising so much earth unexpectedly. However, right after, the veteran's look changes to pure amazement upon feeling the pressure of the monstrous aura emanating from the direction of the guy. Splitting the dust in a furious advance, the protagonist invests in the direction of the elder, shouting with an expression of an authentic vengeful assassin, without being shaken by the pupil's blind anger. Daodan orders the fool to cease performing so much drama and listen in silence to what he possesses to say. However, Xian simply ignores, transposing the elder at a terrifying speed that tears the ground under his feet, while he grumbles, indignant. Dealing a blow loaded with resentment, the guy shouts, demanding to understand the reason for that wretch having tried to annihilate his existence. The massive strength of the attack produces a brutal gale, proving that the petulant one is not there for fun and demands answers through the fight. With eyes overflowing with black magic, he extends his hand, alerting, with a look loaded with hatred, that he will never forgive such cowardly betrayal. However, the veteran intercepts the furious punch with the palm of his hand calmly, as if he sustained a simple sphere of crumpled paper. The thunderous impact sinks the cave wall, generating an immense crater. However, the old warrior's defense remains absolutely intact. Gasping due to extreme effort, the apprentice finally understands the abyssal disparity of strength between the two, even after raising his level. Stunned, the young guy remains disbelieving upon noting that the individual supported everything motionless, while Daodan just sighs, calling him a fool for trying to eliminate him. Amidst the dust, the elder mocks that the egg poison must have corrupted the guy's brain and orders him to use what remained of his mind to reason. Still trembling from amazement, Xian can barely process the fact that his best attack didn't produce absolutely any scratch on the antagonist's epidermis. Shaking his head, disappointed, the master clarifies that it would be senseless to waste poison on a brat whom he could eliminate with a simple flick. Awakening to reality after the embarrassment, the protagonist lowers his gaze, truly embarrassed, and agrees that the brute's logic, unfortunately, makes absolute sense. It happens that, depending on the employment, that lethal egg operates as a sacred remedy that eradicates the impurities of the organism through extreme pain. Beyond the deep purification, the substance fills the empty space with pure mana, something that the guy himself should have already noticed upon firing that punch. Clenching his fist covered in dark lightning, the petulant one notes that his energy reserves really rose 3 or 4 times more. With eyes glowing with pure emotion, he summons the master, feeling the weight of the immense favor he received integrally without any cost. Unable to contain the emotion, Xian jumps, hugging the brute with all his energy, begging for forgiveness in tears for having doubted his character. With aversion to the ridiculous scene, Daoden strikes the student's head, ordering him to release him. However, the guy shouts, animated, upon understanding that his hearing was restored. Displaying a welcoming corner smile, the veteran orders the crybaby to release him definitely. However, the young guy refuses to interrupt the tight hug. While the affection occurs, the elder resumes the mental dialogue, admitting to his invisible partner that the apprentice could, effectively, have perished. Hiding the deep relief, the master recognizes that the bet obtained success and that the guy only subsisted for already possessing a truly powerful nature. Squeezing with vigor the handle of the large sword, he confesses to having needed to risk such brutal insanity so that the young guy evolved with speed and didn't become a useless one. Changing the climate suddenly, the warrior captures Xian under his arm like a bundle of merchandise, alerting at the top of his lungs that they need to leave immediately. Oscillating freely in the air in a humiliating way, the protagonist asks, irritated, the reason for being transported just like luggage once more, displaying a mischievous smile of someone who will execute some artifice. The brute disregards the passenger's complaint completely. Pointing to the top of the dark cave, Daoden decrees in an urgent tone that their time ended, and they need to evade from there swiftly. Instantly, the petulant one's brain connects the dots in a tragic way, and he emits an insult, understanding the disaster that is about to occur. Distant from there, on the arid surface of the open desert, 2 wild scorpions exchange violent blows over the sand under the scalding sun. Suddenly, a colossal sand geyser erupts from the ground with a deafening thud, devouring the monsters and generating a crater in the world. Flying through the air like an authentic rocket, the brute laughs like a demented one, bragging about the speed, while Xian shouts, demanding a common trip. Without granting attention to the desperate passenger's panic, the elder argues, in a harsh way, that the responsibility is the guy's for having remained unconscious during 4 uninterrupted days in the nest. While he criticized the apprentice's pathetic existence, the master interrupts his own reprimand upon noticing an unusual figure emerging on the dusty horizon. Totally devoid of disposition to deal with additional surprises on that chaotic flight, the protagonist alerts, with exhaustion, that absolutely nothing else will surprise him in that existence. However, that audacity is dissipated in a single second when he, finally, turns his neck and fixes his wide eyes on the target that the old man contemplates. Floating in the firmament just like insects, both become tiny before the silhouette of a titanic monster, emerging through the air and splitting the heavy clouds. Completely open mouth before the scenery, Xian asks, terrified, how it is feasible for such a gigantic magic beast to exist being tens of kilometers away. Landing abruptly on the sterile desert soil, Daoden criticizes the absence of serenity and reveals that to be the renowned mobile fortress named Archelon. Observing the massive steps of the lethal creature up close, the veteran elucidates that they domesticated that indestructible rank B turtle, modifying its shell for transport. Pointing to the creature's expression, the petulant one cannot believe that common individuals possess the courage to ride on the back of an immense aberration like that one. Carrying his hand to his head and almost losing his sanity, the protagonist shouts, desperate, that that world is vast and bizarre to the extreme for his own mental integrity. Sustaining the coldness of yesteryear before the danger, the elder finalizes the disgrace, warning that there still exist truly superior beasts, with power to tame that thing there. Following the slow displacement of the absurd fortress cutting the dunes, the master decrees that the young guy needs to witness such eccentricities to ascend with power. At that instant, the pair's sharp eyes capture a small dark point leaping dozens of meters straight from the colossal shell in pure freefall. Landing suddenly amidst the malleable sand, the new individual raises an immense dust wall, intercepting the traveler's trajectory precisely in front. The protagonist, alarmed, asks about the individual's identity. However, the warrior orders silence. Truly tense, he hears the invisible voice proceed, declaring that a vast period has passed. Then, an elder emerges, exposing his presence upon summoning the name of Deodon with immense authority. Deodon greets Pavilsa with intimacy, noting in a mocking way that the friend lost even more teeth since the last time they saw each other. Siving tired, the giant retorts by calling the warrior an abnormal one for continuing full of energy despite having already passed 100 years of age. Soon the master wants to know what brings the old man there. Since that is not his territory, Pavilsa explains that the scavengers are infesting the region. Hearing the conversation, Xian mocks mentally the fact of the brute running away from mere scavengers, thinking the own attitude wise near that brute. But soon the boy gets indignant, questioning how it is possible for these old men to be so absurdly strong instead of weakening with age. Leaving the subject aside, the giant just grumbles that it's no use talking to Deodon and lets out a loud whistle. Immediately the huge chains of the fortress start to be pulled with force, raising a lot of earth around. Watching the movement down there, the protagonist stays completely impressed with the madness of that entire colossal structure. The giant turtle starts walking, tearing through the sandstorm while the master warns that they will depart. A dense dust cloud hits the travelers, forcing the apprentice to cover his face to manage to breathe. Noticing the tense situation and the size of the trouble, Xian deduces that the best thing to do now is to stay shut. Then, Pavilsa finally notices the boy, commenting that it's a new face and asking if the kid is some subordinate of the warrior, letting out an ironic laugh. Deodon pushes the rookie's head, stating that he only decided to help the environment by collecting a bit of trash. The giant finds it fun, confessing the surprise upon seeing a lonely wolf of that kind carrying a companion. For Pavilsa, such a rare attitude coming from the veteran can only mean that the world's end is really arriving. Completely amazed by the view, the boy lets out a swear word without managing to believe what he is seeing. Before them stretches a true city full of life built on the shell, and the rookie soon asks what bizarre place that is. The master explains calmly that it refers to the Mort clan, making the guy question if everyone there possesses blood ties. Observing the happy people on the street, the veteran confirms that they are Pavilsa's descendants. A bunch of useless ones who think they are the chosen ones. Walking with his hands in his pockets, the old man grumbles that all that arrogance serves for nothing without the protection of the giant turtle. Showing off with the brute, Xian asks where he gets so much certainty to speak so badly of others' clans. Casting a serious look over his shoulder, Deodon cuts the subject right away, ordering the kid to keep those questions for later. With a violent kick, the warrior's heavy boot kicks open the door of a luxury establishment. Entering full of swagger, the elder asks if they can take a look at the merchandise first and soon receives the vendor's permission. Raising his right hand, the master invokes dark energy that starts to distort the space around him. A colossal mountain of gold treasures and rare equipment collapses violently on the store floor, raising dust. Totally in shock, Xian asks how many creatures the man killed to gather all that, but the old man threatens to throw him on the pile too. Scratching his head, the apprentice asks if the veteran is a magic user, curious to know where he pulled all that junk from. Irritated by the ignorance, Deodon shouts that that is a subspace, lamenting his own bad luck of having to travel with an idiot. Preparing a brutal flick, the master complains about the insolence of the brat, who only knows how to answer instead of staying quiet. Analyzing a precious stone with his lens, the giant praises the impeccable hunt, stating that each piece there is of maximum quality. With no patience for stalling, the veteran orders the friend to cut the faked flattery and go straight to the final price of that loot mountain. Playing with danger, Pavilsa suggests paying everything in mana stones, but backs off, justifying that it was just a bad joke. Resuming the focus on business, the shopkeeper comments that the warrior doesn't use mana stones anyway and asks what he wants in exchange. Without hesitating, Deodon demands a resistant chest piece made entirely with the mortal remains of the Queen of Ants. Banging the cup on the wooden table firmly, the master makes it clear that the demands haven't ended yet. Maintaining a serious posture, he adds that he will also need a subspace storage tool. Finding the sudden request strange, the giant remembers that the friend already possesses several of those space bags and questions the utility of the armor. The protagonist is startled to hear the old brute confess directly that those pieces of equipment are not for his own use. Pulling Xian by the hood, the warrior reveals to the shopkeeper that the valuable rewards of the mission will be delivered straight to the apprentice. This attitude takes Pavilsa totally by surprise, making the giant's eye widen in astonishment. The rookie gets awkward while the old shopkeeper reflects that the boy must be very useful to receive such care from the great master. Without wasting more time, the giant raises his voice and lets out a thunderous shout, calling for Kaylee in the middle of the lobby. Soon after, the heavy sound of metallic latches echoes when an enormous armored door starts to open slowly. Surprised by the heavy structure's noise, the master and the apprentice turn their faces curious to see who will come out of there. The protagonist remains completely open-mouthed, staring at the open door, adjusting the tools stuck in her waist. The girl comes out of the workshop, asking calmly the reason for having been called. The young mechanic Kaylee introduces herself, calling for her grandfather, while Xian remains totally hypnotized by her beauty. Without stalling, Pavilsa asks if she still has kept that subspace bracelet she herself manufactured a while ago. Thoughtful, the girl answers that she doesn't have a bracelet, but a gauntlet that was so well made that she kept it with a lot of affection. The giant just orders her to deliver the precious item to the kid right in front, leaving the mechanic revolted with the absurd order. Laughing a lot, Deodan intervenes, noting how much the little girl grew full of energy to become an artisan. Praising the girl's evolution, the old warrior states that enchanters are rare even in the capital, and that she achieved a great profession. Totally embarrassed with the praise from the terrifying brute, the young girl looks away, agreeing in a very shy way. Noticing his granddaughter's discomfort, the grandfather orders her to get out of there soon and take advantage of the trip to ask for the creation of the chest piece for the blacksmith Noel. Complying with the order against her will, Kaylee points aggressively, ordering the rookie to follow her, and he obeys, all excited. The master and the merchant stay behind, just watching the unlikely pair move away through the store. Soon the two youngsters start walking through the sunny streets of the city built on the turtle. Starting a conversation, the apprentice asks in the most shameless way what her true relationship is with that monster. With a confident smile, Xian explains that he is talking about the old elder, confessing that he was dragged by him after an accidental encounter. The girl flips out, completely screaming that it is a miracle that the rookie is still alive, walking with a monster as irrational as those. Observing the girl's panic, the protagonist understands that she probably has the same magic vision to see hidden danger. He identifies totally with Kaylee's trauma upon remembering the master's assassin aura, slicing beasts like a brutal demon. Walking faster, she warns the guy to be very careful with that old man disguised as a human, and Xian agrees right away. Stopping before a large metallic door at the end of the street, the apprentice asks if they finally arrived at the right destination. Opening a smile of pure pride, the young mechanic confirms that that is her so-loved workshop. Pushing the heavy doors, the artisan orders the boy to prepare his heart not to have a heart attack with things he has never seen in his life. As soon as he steps in there, the protagonist's eyes widen absurdly before the unforgettable visual shock. The immense hall shines, packed with magical weapons of all types, making the boy yell amazed while the owner boasts about her own works. Completely drooling over her own items, Kaylee praises the perfect harmony of the structure that meshes adamantium with recovery spells. Very excited with the technical explanation, Xian gives a sincere laugh, asking if that spell means that the armor repairs itself. Displaying her sharp teeth, the girl confirms animatedly and warns that the gauntlet's fire attribute will transform the guy into an unbeatable warrior. Half awkward before so much power, the rookie asks if there is no problem stealing such a precious piece of equipment for free. The young girl just warns that it was an order from her grandfather and hands over the gauntlet, but alerts with a sadistic smile that the item only stores things once. Cutting his own thanks in the middle of the sentence, the kid freezes completely upon processing the bad news that it's not possible to remove the weapon later. Without wanting to accept the trap for free, the protagonist pulls the mechanic's arm, trying to tear the gauntlet off by force. The two enter a true tug of war, shouting totally desperate while pulling the equipment each one to their side. Clutching the weapon, Kaylee warns that she will not deliver her precious creation to a nobody, leaving the rookie irritated without knowing what to do. With a rough pull, Xian manages to finally get loose and bursts into laughter, guaranteeing that the item now belongs only to him. Thereupon, a thunderous alarm echoes suddenly throughout the fortress, interrupting the youngsters' fight at the same hour. The apprentice retreats tense, asking if he should return the gauntlet. But the girl soon realizes that the problem is much worse. Totally in shock, the mechanic recognizes the crying of the turtle Archelon and warns in a panic that the enemies have arrived. Getting increasingly confused with her despair, The boy wants to know who exactly the girl is talking about. Without wasting time giving useless explanations, Kaylee turns her back and starts running as fast as she can down the stairs. Meanwhile, in the item store, Pavilsa continues quite relaxed on the sofa, talking calmly with his partner. Casting a serious look over his shoulder, the old warrior grumbles low about the terrible persistence of the invaders. Outside the shell, mysterious knights advance, brutally tearing through the dunes in the sandstorm. Going down the stairs in a hurry, the girl confirms to the rookie that the colossal fortress is being attacked by the scavengers. Right behind her, the protagonist wants to know who those crazy guys are who have been expanding so fast lately. The young woman explains, gasping, that they are the Black Shark Pirates, a band led by a crazy awakened, full of dangerous officers. Terrified, the mechanic reveals that the invaders don't just want to loot, as they are psychopaths who kill without thinking twice. Hearing all that tension, the rookie enters shock, questioning the danger level of a leader who is only ranked D. As soon as they invade the workshop's main room, the girl screams, desperate, calling the grandfather's attention to the imminent invasion. Maintaining a frightening calm before the granddaughter's panic, Pavilsa warns calmly that he already noticed the enemy group's presence. Fearing the massacre, Kaylee suggests moving the Archelon as fast as possible, arguing that the invaders will reach them soon. Clenching his thick fists, the giant decrees firmly that now is the perfect moment to return the attack head on. The young girl agrees and makes herself available to gather the combatants at the same hour, but ends up receiving a dry and direct refusal from the grandfather. Kicking a wooden bench away, the shopkeeper gets up, warning that he and his companion will solve the problem alone. This arrogant attitude takes the artisan by surprise, while Deodan takes advantage of the opening to grab the prodigy from behind. Pulling the kid's hood with a lot of strength, the old master lets out a frightening shout straight into the victim's ear. Completely lost in the subject, the protagonist points his finger at his own chest upon being summoned to assume the front line of the war. Falling into a diabolical laugh, the veteran warns that the guy needs to pay for the treasure, ordering him to go there to fight and kill the debt. Indignant at the suicidal mission, the apprentice breaks down, asking how a mere inexperienced one will defeat a ranked D guy. Ignoring the boy's dramatic crying, the warrior approaches with a dark look, wanting to know if the kid is afraid. The crushing pressure of the master hits Xion square on, making the guy swallow hard without managing to give a single word of response. Walking alone toward the deadly storm, the protagonist faces the immensity of the burning desert ahead. Deeply annoyed with his own stupidity, he curses at the sand while advancing toward what seems to be certain death. The boy cannot accept that he fell for such a cheap provocation. Admitting that the old warrior is manipulative to the bone, breathing deeply, the apprentice tries to focus his mind, activating his magic upon realizing that he no longer has the luxury to keep complaining for nothing. Preparing for the impact of the combat, Xion closes his eyes and concentrates his protective aura around his body. Observing the dust rising dense on the horizon, he calculates that the executioners will arrive with everything in about 5 minutes. Analyzing the newly acquired gauntlet carefully, the rookie feels the metallic equipment pulse and respond to his command. Entering a defensive position, the boy tries desperately to come up with a crazy strategy to manage to take down an awakened. The nervousness soon attacks again upon remembering that the cavalry leader possesses a rank absurdly superior to his capabilities. Observing everything from the top of the great turtle, the giant calls for his drinking partner, wanting to know if all that madness is really valid. Without giving much ball to the drama, the master returns the question, wanting to know exactly what is the affliction that disturbs the merchant. Worried about the cruelty, Pavilsa questions if it is acceptable to leave a mere rank E boy to face death with an open chest. With extreme coldness, Deodan answers dryly that if the kid loses the battle in the desert, he just dies and the story ends there. The shopkeeper grumbles about the bizarre radicalism of the old man, who soon justifies, saying that even a tiger cub loses to a crazy dog. Maintaining a sharp look of pure expectation, the veteran completes that things change quite a bit if the cub decides to show the real fangs. Breaking the reflective mood with arms open, the master raises his voice, ordering the student to pay attention to a single golden rule. Hearing the message blurred in the wind, the rookie's face reacts with surprise and determination upon understanding the old man's insane plan. Tearing through the thick sand, the invaders finally reach the main target, already planning to separate the most useful hostages for illegal sale. Hidden by dirty fabric bands, Captain Gawain's assassin look boils with a completely implacable thirst for blood. Refusing the idea of easy profit, the leader orders at the top of his lungs to cut off everyone's limbs and throw the stumps as monster feed. Excited by the massacre order, the pirates of the vanguard advance without mercy, raising even more destruction on the irregular terrain. Spurring the armored beasts, the scavengers scream that they will teach through pain what is the true terror of the black shark. The heavy cavalry rips the descent of the dunes at high speed, wanting to start the bloodbath against the harmless residents. Suddenly, the bestial mount of one of the pirates loses total support on the ground, opening a fatal breach in the group's perfect advance. Without managing to fix his posture, the invader is ejected brutally from the saddle and plummets face first straight into the soft sand of the battlefield. Right behind, another biker enters deep despair upon seeing the earth give way and ends up swallowed by the whole, screaming in agony. Chaos takes over the entire formation when the desert starts to open into deadly craters, forcing the survivors to step on the brake. Losing control of the reins, the front troop collapses, totally needing to retreat in a hurry so as not to become turtle fertilizer. Standing unharmed far back, Gawain observes the troops sinking in a humiliating way while a lackey checks if the boss suffered any damage. Foaming with hatred at the instant defeat, the officer tries to understand if it was a trap planted, but the servant guarantees there was nothing there. Analyzing the dense dust in the distance, the captain deduces quickly that only one of those wretches from the fortress could be behind it. However, Gawain widens his eye, completely perplexed upon noting a lethal movement emerging right under his nose. Taken by fury at being surprised, the leader turns his neck, cursing the kid and ordering him to release the captured subordinates. Taking advantage of the enemy distraction amidst the gale, the protagonist buries a devastating punch straight into the center of an officer's chest. The internal damage is so strong that the pirate spits out a fountain of dark blood, while consciousness abandons him in the blink of an eye. Paralyzed by the audacity of the fast counterattack, the captain just observes the blood fly without managing to raise his sword in time. With the defeated enemy falling heavy at his feet, the boy exhales a dark aura that makes the sand dance aggressively around him. Wiping his dirty cheek of the battle, Xian casts a blank and freezing look at the rest of the crew, asking for the next challenger. Revolted by the absurd swagger of a brat, two swordsmen jump, cutting the air in a cowardly attempt to slice the boy from behind. Without losing the rhythm, the rookie turns his body and uses his brute gauntlet to parry the sharp blades, generating an energy explosion. The violent clash throws the boy far away, forcing him to slide his shoes through the fine sand until he recovers the center of gravity. Lost in the insane movement that had just happened, one of the scavengers takes a step back, trying to process who that demon is. The swordsman enters pure denial upon confirming that the heavy blade not only missed the target but was totally nullified by a brat. Seeing the colleague obliterated, a third member of the faction enters, flying into the sand, screaming the injured friend's name in a pathetic way. Jumping at the highest point, the aggressor, blind with hatred, warns the accomplices to look at the ground, engaging a fatal aerial blow. Descending with everything, the invader curses the boy, calling him a brat, wanting to know what kind of dirty trick that was. Soon Captain Gawain also gets revolted, questioning the same thing upon seeing the scene. With a quick movement, Xian parries the attack in the air, generating a great impact explosion. Observing the combat, the leader notices, shocked, that the rookie is using sand to defend himself. Irritated, he deduces that the kid kept using cheap tricks all this time and thinks that won't last. Raising his voice, Gawain threatens the protagonist, asking if he really thinks he can stop him. Thereupon, one of the scavengers warns the partner Masamoto that the enemy controls something and suggests a pincer attack. Before they can react, the apprentice buries a brutal blow into both henchmen at the same time. Finalize the action, the boy just stares at the damage while the smoke starts to lower around him. Suddenly, an aggressive voice calls the kid's attention, ordering him to listen with attention. Looking at the sky, Xian reflects that the pirates are more worried about killing a human than facing a rank D. However, he remembers the warning of the Master Daoden, ordering to put in his head that those wretches are not human. Processing the information, the rookie agrees with himself, accepting that the old warrior has all the reason. The veteran's voice echoes in his mind, remembering that the scavengers have fun killing people without any reason. The master reinforces that they torture innocents and have already killed more than 200 people. Questioning if the guy still has pity, remembering the brutality of the guys trampling innocents, the protagonist's hesitation disappears for good. Staring at the storm, Xian questions out loud if such cruel creatures can still be called humans. Totally furious with the mockery, Gawain explodes his red aura, cursing the boy without stopping. Blind by anger, the captain yells a swear word at the top of his lungs. Without wasting time, the invader fires a lethal burst of magical projectiles toward the adversary. Dodging the agile attacks, the rookie listens to the leader complain that he still continues talking too much. Advancing with everything, Gawain calls the guy trash and asks if he thinks those tricks will save him. Turning his face calmly, Zahn hears the pirate's threat promising to slice him to feed the magic beasts. The executioner swears that he will make him beg for death. But the boy just lets out a murmur calling his attention. Maintaining a cold posture, the apprentice asks quietly if those will be the captain's last words. The leader of the pirates freezes completely in place, feeling the weight of the brat's insult. Watching from afar, Deodan demonstrates pure satisfaction upon seeing his student absorbing the bloody lessons. Trembling with hatred, Gawain clenches his fists and tries to babble some response to the audacity. Drawing his sword, Xian repeats the same insult, calling the leader a piece of trash. The invader stays totally incredulous for being belittled in such a direct way by a nobody. Looking at the bodies on the ground, the captain remembers the brutal strength of his subordinate clang. Next, he focuses on Masamoto's pathetic defeat sunken in the hot sand. The leader recognizes that both were skillful warriors who would never lose to a mere amateur. Walking like a true monster in the storm, the rookie emanates a frightening assassin aura. Controlling a giant tornado of earth, the boy makes the captain question what kind of bizarre power that is. Faced with the display of pure strength, the invader swallows hard, feeling the real danger of the situation. Releasing all his red mana, Gawain warns that he's tired of the games and demands to see the real power of the boy. Preparing the advance, the pirate shouts that if the kid is a real awakened, there is no reason to retreat. Totally insane, the leader orders the adversary to stop hiding and fight head-on. With a massive clash, the captain's destructive energy collides violently, creating a power crater. Dealing consecutive blows, the executioner challenges the apprentice, asking what is the next step. Suddenly, the pirate's arrogant expression disappears, giving way to a sudden scare. Turning his head desperate, Gawain tries to find the whereabouts of the enemy, who disappeared from his view. Breaking the dust barrier, Xian appears from nothing, hitting a critical advance straight into the captain's guard. In shock, the invader tries to understand if the boy predicted his movement or used some absurd technique. Despite the scare, the pirate concludes relieved that the adversary finally entered his attack radius on purpose. Acting fast, Xian hits a low kick, completely unbalancing the larger man's base. Falling backward, the captain curses, frustrated for a mage having managed to close the distance that way. Charging the slip, up Gawain prepares a counterblow, warning that a single error in a real battle is fatal. Receiving the pressure head-on, the protagonist listens to the pirate state that dirty trick will cost his life. Dealing a heavy punch, the leader warns that hit is to avenge Masamoto's death. A red energy explosion marks the violent contact of the blow on the rookie's defense. The sequence of impacts generates a shockwave that sweeps the sand of the battlefield. The captain's brute power shatters the ground around, showing the difference in experience. Firing a rain of punches, Gawain goes, citing the name of each dead lackey as motivation. The massacre continues, implacable, forcing the boy to scream in pain, while he takes a beating for the rest of the crew. Sure of the victory, the executioner nails that any magical ability becomes useless in a grabbed hand-to-hand fight. Holding the boy's arm with strength, the leader orders him to blame his own weakness before dying. Taking advantage of the immobilization, the pirate launches a devastating punch, aiming to tear the rookie's head off. For Gawain's complete despair, the fist passes only through the empty coat, leaving him totally without understanding. Spinning in the air with pure agility, the apprentice escapes certain death, using the whirlwind to his favor. Observing the floating equipment, the invader notices that the kid ejected the gauntlets just to escape. Furious at the slippery escape, the captain curses the rookie as a cursed rat while trying to follow him. With a perfect landing, Xian plants his feet on the sand, already taking safe distance from the pumped-up maniac. Bleeding from the mouth, Gawain admits he panicked and committed a critical error upon letting the prey escape. Analyzing his own wounded chest, the pirate notes, satisfied that the potency of the impacts decreased drastically. The leader deduces right at that hour that the gauntlets were magic amplifiers, and now the boy is vulnerable. Matting fast, he understands that the target uses wind magic and raises sand to cause real physical damage. Thereupon, the protagonist engages a furious run, starting for the all or nothing against the adversary. Watching the frontal investment, the executioner guarantees that he already unraveled all the cheap tricks of that brat. Concentrating an absurd amount of aura in his fist, the captain decrees that the rookie lost all strength. Mocking the unarmed mage's face, Gawain thinks it madness he attempt a frank exchange without the amplifiers. But the apprentice's eyes glow intensely, revealing that the suicidal strategy was only a distraction. In the blink of an eye, Xian vanishes and appears on the leader's back, burying a clean and devastating blow. Spitting blood in agony, the pirate stays totally in shock upon realizing that he was deceived until the last second. Taking advantage of the breach, the protagonist notices relieved that the enemy finally lowered his guard. Furious with the trickery, Gawain curses the boy, accusing him of using the same dirty trick twice. However, the captain freezes in place upon processing that the rookie is fighting completely barehanded. Observing the storm around, the invader thinks it impossible for a mage to channel so much raw power in that way. Without an item to amplify magic, the math doesn't close in the leader's head, who starts to deduce the true nature of the kid. Without giving time to think, Xian advances with everything and hits a brutal blow, tearing the enemy's defense. With the impact, the pirate retreats, dazed, trying to deny desperately the reality of what he is facing. Fallen on the hot earth, he murmurs about the frightening ability to control the grains around. Surrounded by deadly stakes, the executioner notices that the boy's power manipulates the environment itself. Totally in a panic, the captain yells that such an absurdity shouldn't even exist. Thereupon, the storm swallows the leader's body, sealing the fate of that violent combat in the middle of the desert. Watching from afar, Pavilsa stays completely shocked upon confirming that the boy controls sand. Impressed, the giant notes that the entire world became the apprentice's weapon, finding it hard to believe in that. Remembering the vast experience of the executioner, the shopkeeper understands that the boy would die if he fought head-on. With deadly calm, Daoden explains that the protagai acted on purpose to force the enemy to open his guard perfectly. Exhausted on the earth floor, the protagonist breathes deeply while the old warrior recognizes that he acted by pure instinct. Even being an absurdity, the master notes that the kid managed to evolve the strategy in the heat of the battle. Agreeing with the partner, the giant admits that that young man definitely isn't a common cub. Soon after, Pavilsa calls the veteran by name in a tone much more serious and intrigued. Questioning the level of strength, the shopkeeper wants to know from what hold a friend unearthed a monster like that. Walking with difficulty through the destroyed field, Xian holds his arm, feeling the weight of the mortal combat. Evaluating the damage, the guy confesses to himself that a single wrong blow would have cost his life right there. Creating expectation, the rookie gives a little laugh, thinking that, at least he will win a compliment from the old man. However, the apprentice's legs give way suddenly, and he ends up almost falling face first into the soft sand. Recovering balance, he raises his head and sights the imposing silhouette of the master at the top of the dune. Without understanding the heavy climate coming from up there, the boy stays totally confused with the silence. Breaking the tranquility, Daoden lets out a furious shout, calling the student an idiot and criticizing the pathetic exhibition. Indignant at the gratuitous scolding, the protagonist yells, wanting to know what absurd mistake he committed this time. Staring with a frightening look, the veteran doesn't demonstrate a ping of pity for the kid's situation. The master then throws in his face that the big problem of everything was the adversary the boy decided to spare. Explaining the serious failure, Daoden warns that the swordsman left alive was about to set a fatal ambush, remembering the treacherous attack he needed to prevent. The warrior questions what the student expected was going to happen. Caught in the act of his own naivety, Xian looks away, stammering without having how to defend himself from the accusation. With a more severe tone, the old man wants to know until when the boy will carry that useless kindness. Turning his back to the desert, the veteran just orders the protege to return once and for all to the city. He reinforces in a dry way that maintaining that weak mentality is a fast shortcut to death. Observing the harsh lesson in silence, Pavilsa understands perfectly the partner's intention. Further back, the young Kaylee stares at the rookie with a look that mixes relief and a lot of concern. The magical gauntlet recovered rests in the earth, proving that the battle finally finished for real. Standing in the middle of the gale, the apprentice absorbs the master's harsh words echoing in his head without stopping. Feeling the weight of his own weakness, the boy lowers his head, recognizing that he almost blew everything. Suddenly, a friendly voice thanks him for the effort, taking the protagonist from his dark thoughts. Walking beside the granddaughter, Pavilsa explains that the people from there don't have any talent to fight or defend themselves. Being just blacksmiths, the giant confesses that a carnage would have happened if the guy hadn't stopped the enemy cavalry. With a sincere smile, the shopkeeper demonstrates his gratitude, stating that the guy did a splendid job. staring at his own boots. Xian just murmurs, understanding perfectly the weight of what he managed to prevent. Cutting the heavy climate, Kaylee grabs the boy's arm, all excited, praising his courage to face the pirates alone. Trying to cheer up the hero, the mechanic tells him to ignore the grumpy warrior's criticisms and his absurd standards. While the girl chatters, the rookie reflects internally that the real problem is not the perfectionism of the old man. Remembering the fight, the apprentice admits he knew of the ambush risk, but even so chose not to finish the wounded enemy. Clenching his fist, he confesses to himself that he pretended not to see the threat, hoping the guy would simply disappear from there. Having total awareness of the group's evil, the boy had already accepted that those scavengers deserved death. Despite that certainty, the boy recognizes that courage was missing at the 0 hour to apply the final blow and deal with death face to face. Looking at his blood-stained hand, he understands that he acted like a coward, just fleeing from the guilt of taking a life. Accepting the hard reality, the protagonist concludes that the master's scolding was 100% correct. Observing the veteran from afar, he deduces that the man already saw many Bond idiots die early on the battlefield. Processing the teaching, the guy realizes that all that aggression was just a twisted way of trying to keep him alive. Opening a relieved smile, the student finds humor in the fact of the old man being terrible at demonstrating any affection. Far ahead, the giant points to the friend in a comical way, while the granddaughter is surprised by their conversation. Laughing a lot, Pavilsa comments he never saw someone treat the warrior that way and asks if the guy hit his head. Explaining the situation to the friend, the shopkeeper comments on the boy's dangerous hesitation during a mortal confrontation. Pulling the rookie's cheeks, Kaylee feels pity and states it is too heavy a burden for someone so young. Sighing in a guilty way, the giant laments that the boy is suffering to protect useless adults. Without wanting to prolong the drama, Pavilsa calls everyone to eat and orders the hero of the day to go take a well-deserved shower. Already inside the base, Daoden rests comfortably in an armchair reading a book in total silence. With slow steps, the apprentice enters the luxury room looking for his travel partner. Without even taking his eyes off the reading properly, the master orders the lazy kid to stop trying to hide in the corners. The veteran mocks, asking if the coward came to ask to go back home, receiving a judging look from the boy. Stomping his feet, the protagonist warns from the hallway that the old man is underestimating his willpower way too much since ever. Trying to maintain the swagger, the boy guarantees that a combat like that was nothing too much, but soon loses his reasoning. Noticing the flimsy lie, the warrior points coldly to the student's hands that don't stop shaking. The guy tries to justify himself. However, the master comforts, saying that only a psychopath would leave unscathed from that tense situation. The elder explains that taking a human life will never be easy, and that guilt will be a constant shadow on his trajectory. Taking a sip of his drink, the master advises that the guy shouldn't try to forget what occurred nor anesthetize himself against remorse. Finalizing the heavy lesson, he warns that if the guilt disappears completely, the young man will become equal to the monsters he just sliced. Maintaining the firm posture, the master warns the boy to keep that lesson well, because the fact of feeling pain is the greatest proof that he is still human. Throwing a small bracelet in the student's direction, the veteran decrees that the rookie can still return home in case he cannot support the weight of that life. Grabbing the item in the air with determination, Xian rebukes indignant, remembering he already warned he won't be broken by any of that. The protagonist guarantees that he can deal with the situation and take care of himself, asking the warrior to stop worrying for nothing. Playing with the tension, the apprentice warns that he needs to continue accompanying the stubborn old man to guarantee that he doesn't have a lonely death. The audacious and unexpected response takes Daoden unprepared for a brief moment. Thereupon, the veteran shuts his face and just grumbles, calling the prodai a cheeky brat. Sitting in the chair in a relaxed way, the master provokes, saying that the guy would miss him if the environment became too silent. Without accepting the silly accusation, Xian enters despair, wanting to talk properly and questioning who would take care of the old man's body if he went away. But the cheap provocation results only in a swift blow coming straight in the direction of the talkative guy's head. Far from there, the climate heats up inside a large workshop, where dozens of blacksmiths hammer a single incandescent blade at the same time. Focused on heavy work, the artisans mold the glowing metal with extreme precision under the intense heat of the magic forge. A colossal hammer blow hits the anvil, spreading a true shower of sparks that illuminates the entire dark hall. Totally amazed by the glorious scene, Kaylee confesses she never saw so many master blacksmiths gathered in a single place before. Observing the brutal effort of the team, Pavulsa explains with tranquility that all that work serves only to stabilize the warrior's sword. Completely shocked with the energy emanated, the girl questions how a simple sword manages to exude so much power after several days of forging. The giant reveals with arms crossed that the weapon known as crayon is a true masterpiece born solely from a man's obsession. Staring at the extreme heat of the workshop, the young mechanic admits she never saw anything like that and finds it hard to believe that that was created by human hands. The artisans continue the brutal work, while the weapon reveals having so many enchantments and beast cores that it doesn't fit absolutely anything else in it. Wiping sweat from his face from the effort, one of the masters in charge reports that the blade passes the dark sensation of being a living creature. Still without understanding properly the weight of the story, Kaylee asks who was the genius person capable of creating that, and soon discovers that the creator is named Crayon. The girl finds it strange the sword having the same name as the blacksmith, but the grandfather just orders her to accept that the weapon is an incomparable historic piece. Changing the subject at the same hour, the giant lowers his head and calls the granddaughter by name with a much more serious tone of voice. Pushing the heavy wooden doors, Pavulsa warns that the pair will depart soon, leaving the mechanic annoyed by the quick departure of Xion. The shopkeeper justifies that the warrior hates staying parked in the same place for too long and must already be all set to hit the road. Far from there, the apprentice is thrown on the ground with a bump on his head and questions, exhausted, what kind of aggressive madness the old man is plotting now. Drinking his tea calmly in the armchair, the veteran responds that that is just basic training and orders the lazy kid to stop complaining for nothing. Arriving in the room, Pavulsa criticizes the way the friend treats the young man, but Deodan rebukes right away, saying that the boy also doesn't respect the older ones. Falling into a loud laugh, the giant warns that the fixing of the great sword is in the final stretch, making the protagonist jump with joy with the news. Massaging his own temples, the shopkeeper praises the efficiency of his heavy team and orients the warrior to pass by the workshop to pick up the lethal equipment. Stopping in front of the giant suddenly, the old master lowers his guard for an instant and thanks sincerely for everything the partner did. Hearing those incredibly rare words of gratitude, the giant's eye widens in a pure state of shock. Totally incredulous with the meek attitude of the tough friend, Pavulsa takes a step forward, stammering to ask what he just listened to. Passing straight by the shopkeeper toward the exit, the warrior remembers that the friend himself stated recently that the two probably would never see each other again. With his back to the center of the room, Deodan agrees with the tragic prediction, guaranteeing in a cold way that that was their last meeting in this life. The definitive and heavy farewell hits the merchant squarely, making him reflect in silence about everyone's past in that world. The giant remembers with pure bitterness the day humanity turned its back on the truth and decided to live fleeing like a bunch of useless cowards. Ironically, prolonged life became an unbearable burden for humans, a weight that the gray, bearded brute knows much better than anyone there. While everyone fled from destruction and chaos in the past, the gray-haired veteran was the only fighter who marched toward danger without hesitating. Pavulsa recognizes the greatness of that master who carries alone the weight of more than a century of battles, feeling only deep admiration for the partner. Processing the weight of the definitive goodbye, the giant's mind echoes one more time the unexpected gratitude he just received. With a huge smile on his face, the merchant raises his hand and yells at the top of his lungs that they will certainly see each other again the next time. The sudden and warm promise of a reunion makes the warrior's eye tremble lightly behind his monocle lens. Following the master's heavy steps toward the exit, Xion turns his face and casts a quite friendly farewell look for the fortress's owner. Hiding his expression in the shadow, the old fighter finally understands the partner's intentions and accepts his stubbornness in absolute silence. Entering the game in a rare way, the old warrior waves back without looking back and warns in a loud and clear voice that he will be waiting anxiously for that reunion. Leaving the city's surroundings behind, the colossal turtle resumes its journey, walking slowly through the infinite vastness of the scalding desert. 2 weeks pass since the agitated farewell, and Pavulsa rests relaxed in a chair, appreciating the dusty view of the infinite horizon. Trying to give a scare to the brute, Kaylee approaches stealthily from behind, but ends up frustrated when the grandfather warns calmly that he already noticed her presence. The shopkeeper questions with mockery the age of his granddaughter for her to continue with those childish pranks. But the girl soon defends herself, alleging that she is still too young to mature. Taking a nice sip of his lukewarm drink, the giant notices the mechanic's spoiled behavior and soon asks if there is something disturbing her mind. With a totally melancholic look turned to the coarse sand, the artisan confesses in a shy way that she is feeling a strange void in her chest since the pair's quick departure. The girl reports that the image of the young apprentice, surging with pure joy upon receiving the new valuable pieces of equipment, doesn't leave her head in any way. In the vivid memories of the young woman, the protagonist appears amazed, and without believing in the quantity of valuable magical items he just received as a gift from the great workshop. On that fun day, the rookie was so dazzled by the bracelet's infinite space that he even asked jokingly if the grumpy old man didn't want to enter in there too. Remembering the scandalous laugh of the innocent boy, Kaylee hopes sincerely that he manages to keep that radiant smile on his face for the rest of his difficult journey. Supporting his chin in his hands, the experienced veteran finds humor in the deep declaration and points immediately that the blushing granddaughter is speaking exactly like an elderly person. Returning to stay serious from 1 hour to another, Pavelsa stares at the girl and asks that she not hesitate to help the guy in every way in case their paths cross again. Opening a smile much more confident, the talented mechanic guarantees she will deliver her best creation for the hero who saved the city from a terrible bloodbath. Totally sure of destiny's paths, the wise giant decrees with an unshakable peace that the young woman with all the certainty of the world will find that boy again someday. Drinking his green tea calmly, the shopkeeper reflects that supporting the direct heir of Daoden's will is the only acceptable way of paying a minimal fraction of the debt they possess. Observing the titanic creature vanish in the middle of the dust storm, the elder recognizes that all humanity owes its own existence to the sacrifice of the old warrior. In another corner, well away from the deadly desert, a brutal and precise punch hits the protagonist's head with total force, making him cry from pain. Clutching the painful lump, Xian breaks down in pure anger, accusing the impatient master of diminishing even more his IQ, which was already shamefully low since ever. Irritated by the irritating screaming, Daoden yells that the kid disturbed his sacred sleep and exposes his hypocrisy for fleeing from the nocturnal slaughter of magic beasts by pure accumulated guilt. Wielding his legendary blade named Crayon, the warrior warns that even the magical sword itself is clicking its tongue in total disgust at the boy's ridiculous attitude. Without a single ping of pity in his heart, the veteran applies a second violent blow in the opposite direction of the skull, guaranteeing in a sadistic way that will balance the poor student's IQ for good. Buried deeply to the waist in the hot sand with his head steaming from the double punch, the apprentice coughs dust nonstop, trying to recover from the violent punishment. Talking alone with the vastness of sand around, the rookie fakes victimhood, demanding moral support from his equipment. But the master soon orders him to cut that completely crazy talk. Changing the dejected expression for an unshakable focus, the boy celebrates internally the fact of having exhausted in a perfect way all his daily mana reserve. Analyzing his own worn-out hands, Xian compares the constant use of magic with muscular growth, determined to force all his limits to expand his own brute power. While the tireless elder hacks dozens of monsters deep in the scene, the apprentice admits that desperate hunger for evolution was born directly from the almost fatal clash against the pirates. Stuck comfortably in the soft earth dune, the boy recognizes the hard and sad reality of having lost badly in his first real and violent confrontation against another awakened human being. Raising his left arm to the great starry night, the protagonist confesses in a melancholy tone that the burning anger for his own weakness is the only true feeling that remained inside him. Staring at the monstrous mountain of beasts slaughtered by the master, the guy understands that even the most irrational creatures fight desperately for life and questions himself if he himself is really living. Sitting on the cold sand, the protagonist promises to himself that he never wants to feel the bitter taste of disappointment again, and that he will get stronger in any way. With a lot of will, Xian decides to continue training hard to get used to the new gauntlet he won from the talented mechanic Kaylee. Upon remembering the girl's instructions, he laments not having picked up any item with fire attribute in the dungeon to leave the equipment even more destructive. Thoughtful, the boy reaches the point of questioning if talking to his own weapon would make him stay as absurdly strong as his master. Observing the old man grumbling alone in the middle of the gale far away, the apprentice finds everything very bizarre and wonders if that is some type of male menopause. While the warrior crushes a beast's core with his own hand, the rookie asks if the hunt is already over, receiving the confirmation right soon after. After cleaning the dirt from his gloves, Deoden notices the horizon darkening and warns with tranquility that the night is already starting to fall. Standing close to the rocks, the guy murmurs softly, noting a strange change in the environment. Holding the magic stone he just received, Xian questions if the sun is setting faster lately, or if it's just an impression because they are very busy. Walking through the dunes, the veteran explains that the phenomenon means that they finally crossed the border to a totally new region. The master details that they need to navigate by the position of the sun daily, since almost everything around there turned into an infinite sand sea, and without points of reference. Soon the protagonist deduces that the old man is just ordering him to find a place to sleep soon. But the warrior denies the accusation right at that hour. With a confident smile on his face, Deoden points forward, warning that they just received a grandiose welcoming committee. A colossal and imposing structure rises in the middle of the desert, illuminated in a sinister way by a mysterious orange light. Totally confused with the size of that, the apprentice asks if that is really a common rock, finding the space too small to house a mine. Totally excited, Deoden reveals that the place hides a rocky mountain so massive under the earth that not even the large worms manage to approach. The excessive excitement of the warrior takes the protagonist totally by surprise, leaving him without understanding the reason for so much sudden agitation of the old guy. Jumping with an absurd speed, the master shoots toward the rock, yelling at the top of his lungs that the stone structure is exactly like the boy. Observing the unusual scene from up there, the apprentice deduces that the old fighter must be just happy for finally having arrived in a slightly different scenery. Dealing with the infinite and tiring energy of the elder, Xian sighs and grumbles alone that taking care of the third age is an ungrateful and very difficult task. A violent impact shakes the ground in a brutal way, raising a thick cloud of dust when the warrior lands with everything on top of the mountain. Landing right behind, the rookie is charged for the delay and rebates with irony, asking if they swapped mental ages without noticing. To start the deserved rest, the veteran sits and adjusts the heavy leather glove in his hand with quite firmness. Accommodated on the ground to recover the breath of the trip, the oldest breaks the silence to know how the boy is dealing with the crossing through the scalding desert. In a very quiet way, the protagonist guarantees that he is managing to handle himself very well thanks to all the difficult lessons he received on the path. Despite the evident evolution, Xian maintains humility in day and admits, smiling, that there still lacks a long path ahead to really get strong for real. Faced with the sincere confession, the master demonstrates certain approval and points dryly that at least the guy knows how to recognize his own place in the world. The veteran still throws in his face that it would be impossible for the kid to think himself strong walking with a legend like him, calling the beautiful words mere useless flattery. Used to the rude and cutting personality of the companion, the guy just maintains silence, absorbing the gratuitous slap. Upon staring at the beauty of the starry sky, Xian asks how much is left to master his ability, and the master decrees that he needs to split an entire storm in the middle. The grandiosity of the imposed goal leaves the rookie in complete silence, just reflecting on the weight of the gigantic challenge. Maintaining the seriousness of the moment, Deoden reveals that if they continue following straight through that rocky path, they will end up bumping into a very old dungeon. The old man explains that he found the place for personal reasons many decades ago and warns that it is an area of extreme danger, but that exploration can help in the boy's skills. Demonstrating immediate interest in the risky proposal, Xian looks fixedly and asks in a direct way if the master is willing to face that exploration with him. With an excited smile from ear to ear, the boy already wants to leave at the same hour, but the veteran cuts the festive mood, ordering him to shut his mouth and go sleep. In the middle of absolute darkness, two figures run in a desperate and gasping way, fleeing from some threat hidden in the storm. Upon listening to hurried steps far away, the protagonist turns his confused face and soon questions if some stealthy magic beast approached their camp. Prepared for nocturnal combat, the guy suggests eliminating the creature, but ends up taking a reversal from the warrior, who asks with mockery if he prefers to make friends. Thereupon, a female scream echoes, cutting the night, warning for someone to hurry in that direction, leaving the apprentice totally in a state of alert. Observing the intruders arrive at the base of the rock, discussing in a panic about separating, Xian tries to understand if they are being hunted by some relentless, implacable predator. However, the confusion of the situation reaches the maximum peak when the boy finally manages to see clearly the desperate silhouettes running in his direction. The rookie enters pure shock upon noting the faces and the pointed ears of the large group of fugitives, asking out loud how it is possible for there to exist elves lost around there.